Part 4, Chapter 13 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. When the company arose from dinner, Levin wanted to follow Kitty into the drawing-room, but he was afraid, not that it would be disagreeable to her, but that it would be too obvious a wooing of her. So he remained with the men and took part in the general conversation. And without looking at Kitty, he was conscious of her motions, of her glances, and of the place where she was in the drawing-room. Without the least effort he immediately began to fulfill the promise that he had made to her to love all men, and to think nothing but good of them. The conversation turned on the Commune in Russia, which Pestov considered as the beginning of what he called a new order of things. Levin agreed as little with him as he did with Sergey Ivanovitch, who it seemed to him recognized, and at the same time denied, the value of this institution. But he talked with them, trying only to reconcile them and tone down their excitability. He was not in the least interested in what he himself said, and was still less interested in what they said, but his one desire was to see all of them happy and contented. He now realized what one thing was important, and that one was at first yonder in the drawing-room, and afterward moved about and was now near the door. Without turning around he was conscious of a look and a smile fixed on him, and he could not help looking. She was standing there with Shtcherbatsky and looking at him. "I thought you were going to the piano," said he, approaching her. "Music is what I have to do without in the country." "No, we merely came to find you, and I thank you for coming to us," she replied, recompensing him with a smile. "What pleasure can there be in discussing? Really, no one ever convinced another." "Yes, that is true," said Levin. "It generally happens that you get excited in a discussion simply from the fact that you can never tell exactly what your opponent is trying to show." Levin had many times noticed that in discussions among clever people, after an immense output of energy, an immense array of logical terms and subtleties, the disputants came at last to an acknowledgment that what they had been so interminably striving to prove to each other was a matter of common knowledge from the very beginning, but that they liked something different, and therefore were not willing to acknowledge what they liked, so as not to be controverted. He had often met with the experience that in the midst of a dispute you find what your opponent likes, and suddenly you find that you yourself like the same thing, and you immediately agree, and then all your arguments fall to the ground as useless. But sometimes he had had the opposite experience. You at last say what you like and evolve your arguments, and if perchance you speak well and sincerely, suddenly your opponent assents and ceases to uphold the other side. This is exactly what he meant. She wrinkled her brows trying to comprehend, but as soon as he began to explain, her mind grasped his meaning. "I understand. One must make sure why he is disputing, what he likes, if possible." She had fully grasped and expressed his badly phrased idea. Levin smiled with rapture, so striking was the transition from the complicated prolix discussion between Pestov and his brother to this clear, laconic, almost wordless communication of the most abstruse thoughts. Shtcherbatsky stepped away, and Kitty, going to a card table, sat down, and taking a piece of chalk in her hand, began to draw circles on the green cloth. They took up the topic which was under discussion at dinner, as to the emancipation and occupation of women. Levin was inclined to agree with Darya Alexandrovna that a girl who was not going to marry would find feminine occupations in some family. He urged that not a single family can get along without some female help, that every family, however poor or rich, has and must have someone to look after the children. "No," said Kitty, blushing, but looking at him frankly with her honest eyes. "A girl may be so situated that she cannot without humiliation go into a family, but she herself—" He understood what she hinted at. "Oh, yes," he said. "Yes, yes, yes, you are right." And he realized all that Pestov was trying to prove at dinner about the freedom of women, merely by the fact that he saw in Kitty's heart a maiden's dread of humiliation, and loving her, he experienced this dread and this humiliation, and immediately renounced his former arguments. A silence ensued. She went on making designs with the chalk on the table. Her eyes shone with a gentle gleam. Submitting to her mood, He felt in his being all the increasing tension of happiness. "Oh, I have covered the table with my scrawls," said she, laying down the chalk, with a movement as if she were going to rise. "How can I stay alone without her?" thought Levin, terrified, and picking up the chalk. "Wait," said he, sitting down at the table. "I've wanted for a long time to ask you something." He looked straight into her affectionate but nevertheless startled eyes. "Please, what is it?" "This is it," he said, taking the chalk and writing the letters WYS III WIITOA. These letters were the initials of the words, "When you said it is impossible, was it impossible then or always?" It was not at all likely that Kitty would be able to make out this complicated question. Levin looked at her, nevertheless, as if his life depended on whether she would guess these words or not. She looked at him gravely, then rested her forehead on her hand and tried to decipher it. Occasionally she would look up at him, asking him with her eyes, "Is what I think right?" "I know what it is," she said, blushing. "What is this word?" he asked, pointing to the I of the word impossible. "That letter stands for impossible. The word is not right," she replied. He quickly rubbed out what he had written, gave the chalk to her, and stood up. She wrote TICNAD. Dolly, seeing her sister with the chalk in her hand, a timid and happy smile on her lips, raising her eyes to Levin, who was leaning over the table, beaming now at her, now at the cloth, felt consoled for the grief caused by her conversation with Alexey Alexandrovitch. Her face suddenly grew radiant. He had understood the reply. Then I could not answer differently. He looked at Kitty timidly and inquiringly. "Only then?" "Yes," replied the young girl's smile. "BN, but now?" he asked. "Read this. I will tell you what I wish very much." And she quickly traced the initials TYMFAFWTP. This meant, "that you might forgive and forget what took place." He seized the chalk in turn with his excited, trembling fingers, and crushing it wrote down the initials of these words, "I have nothing to forgive and forget. I have never ceased to love you." Kitty looked at him, and her smile died away. "I understand," she murmured. He sat down and wrote a long phrase. She comprehended it, and without even asking it is thus and so, took the chalk and instantly replied. It was some time before he made out what she wrote, and had to keep looking into her eyes. His wits were dulled by his happiness. He could not supply the words which she intended, but in her lovely eyes, radiant with joy, he understood all that he needed to know. And he wrote 3 letters. But he had not finished writing them ere she read them under his hand, and herself finished the sentence and answered it, "Yes." "You are playing secrétaire, are you?" said the old prince, coming up to them. "Well, if you are going to the theatre, it is time to start." Levin rose and accompanied Kitty to the door. This conversation decided everything. Kitty had acknowledged her love for him, and had given him permission to come the next morning to speak to her parents. Chapter 13. Part 4, Chapter 14 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. After Kitty had gone and Levin was left alone, he felt such a restlessness and such an unendurable longing for the morning to come when he might see her again and settle his destiny forever, that he dreaded, as he dreaded death, the 14 hours which he should have to endure without her. He felt it absolutely necessary to be with and to talk with someone so as not to remain alone, so as to cheat the time. Stepan Arkadyevitch, whom he would have liked to keep with him, was going, so he said, to a reception, but in reality to the ballet. Levin could only tell him that he was happy, and should never, never forget what he owed to him. Stepan Arkadyevitch's eyes and smile showed Levin that he suitably appreciated his feelings, "What? Then you have nothing more to say about dying?" said Oblonsky, pressing his friend's hand affectionately. "No," replied the latter. Darya Alexandrovna, too, almost congratulated him when she bade him good night. She said, "How glad I am that you have made up with Kitty. We ought to prize old friends." And her words displeased Levin. She could not comprehend how lofty and inaccessible to her all this was for him, and she should not have dared to refer to it. Levin took his departure, but, to avoid being alone, he joined his brother. "Where are you going?" "To a meeting." "Well, I'll go with you. May I?" "Why not?" said Sergey Ivanovitch, smiling. "What has happened to you today?" "What has happened? Good fortune," said Levin, letting down the carriage window. "Have you any objection? I'm suffocating. Good fortune has happened to me. Why have you never been married?" Sergey Ivanovitch smiled. "I am delighted. She seems like a splendid he began. "No, don't say anything about it. Don't say anything about it," cried Levin, clutching the collar of his shuba with both hands and covering his face with the fur. A splendid girl! What commonplace words! And how feebly they corresponded to his feelings! Sergey Ivanovitch laughed a gay laugh. This was a rare occurrence with him. "I should think I might say that I am very glad of this." Tomorrow you may speak, but not another word now. Not another word. Not another word. Be silent," said Levin, and pulling his shuba still higher round his face, he added, "I love you very much. But tell me, may I go to your meeting?" "Of course you may." "What is the subject for your discussion tonight?" asked Levin, still smiling. They reached their destination. Levin heard the secretary stammer through the report, which evidently he did not understand, but he could see, from this secretary's face, that he was a good, amiable, sympathetic fellow. It was evident from the way he hesitated and became confused while reading. Then came the debates. They discussed about the disposal of certain sums of money and the laying of certain sewer pipes. Sergey Ivanovitch attacked two members of the commission, and made a long, triumphant speech against them. After which another member, reading from a paper, after some timid hesitation, replied briefly in a charming though bitter fashion, and then Sviazhsky, he too was there, in his turn expressed his opinions nobly and eloquently. Levin listened and clearly saw that neither the money to be expended nor the sewer pipes were of serious importance, and that they were not really quarreling, but were all such pleasant, congenial people, and consequently all was serene among them. They interfered with no one, and all seemed happy. Levin noticed with surprise that they all seemed to him to-day transparent, that, from some trifling incidents which once would have entirely escaped his notice, he could read their souls, and see how good they all were. Especially did they seem to like him, Levin. This was shown by the way they talked with him, and even those who did not know him looked at him pleasantly and in a friendly manner. "Well, how did you like it?" asked Sergey Ivanovitch. "Very much. I never should have believed that it would be so interesting. It is splendid." Sviazhsky approached Levin and invited him to come and take a cup of tea at his house. Levin could not for the life of him comprehend or remember why he had been prejudiced against Sviazhsky, or what he had seemed to him to lack. He was a clever and wonderfully good fellow. "I should be delighted," replied Levin, and he immediately inquired after Madame Sviazhsky and her sister. By a strange association of ideas, as Sviazhsky's sister-in-law suggested marriage, he concluded that nobody would be more interested than she and her sister to hear of his happiness, so he was very much pleased with the idea of going to see them. Sviazhsky questioned him about his affairs, always refusing to admit that anything could be discovered which had not already been discovered in Europe. But now his theory did not arouse Levin's opposition. On the contrary, he felt that Sviazhsky was right, and Levin admired the gentleness and delicacy with which he avoided the expression of his arguments. The ladies were especially charming. It seemed to Levin that they all knew, and that they shared his joy, but that they avoided speaking of it from discretion. He remained for 3 hours, talking on various subjects, and continually alluding to what filled his soul, without noticing that he was mortally tiring his friends, and that they were falling asleep. At last, Sviazhsky, yawning, accompanied him to the vestibule, very much surprised at the strange state of mind in which his friend seemed to be. It was 2 o'clock. Levin reached his hotel and was aghast at the thought of passing the next 10 hours alone, a prey to his impatience. The watchman who was on duty in the corridor lighted his candles and was about to withdraw when Levin stopped him. This fellow, who was called Yegor, and whom Levin had never before noticed, seemed like a good, intelligent man, and above all, kind-hearted. "Tell me, Yegor, don't you find it hard to go without your sleep?" "What can I do about it? It is our calling. We have an easier time in gentlemen's houses, but here we get larger wages." It seemed that Yegor was the father of a family of 4 children, 3 boys and a girl trained as a seamstress, whom he hoped to marry to a harness-maker's clerk. Levin seized this opportunity to communicate his ideas about love in marriage to Yegor, remarking that people are always happy when there is love, because their happiness is in themselves. Yegor listened attentively and evidently understood Levin's meaning, but he confirmed it by an unexpected reflection, that when he, Yegor, had served good masters, he had always been satisfied with them, and that he was contented with his master now, although he was a Frenchman. "What a wonderfully good fellow," thought Levin. "Well, and did you love your wife, Yegor, when you married her?" "Why shouldn't I have loved her?" replied Yegor. And Levin noticed Yegor also grew very enthusiastic and was eager to confide to him his inmost thoughts. "My life, too, has been extraordinary," he began, his eyes shining, overcome by Levin's enthusiasm as one catches a yawning fit. "From my childhood—" But the bell rang. Yegor departed, and Levin was left alone. He had eaten scarcely anything at dinner. He had refused to take any tea or supper at Sviazhsky's, yet even now he could not think of eating. He had not slept the preceding night, yet he did not think of sleeping now. His room was cold, but it seemed so stifling that he could not breathe. He opened both casements and sat down on a table in front of one. Above the roofs, covered with snow, rose the carved cross of a church, and higher still were the triangular constellation of the Charioteer and the bright yellow Capella. He breathed in the cold air which filled his room, and looked now at the cross, and now at the stars, rising as in a dream among the figures and memories called up by his imagination. Toward 4 o'clock in the morning he heard footsteps in the corridor. He opened his door and saw a gambler named Myaskin, whom he knew, returning from his club. He walked along, coughing, gloomy and scowling. "Poor unfortunate fellow," thought Levin, and his eyes filled with tears of pity and love for that man. He wanted to stop him, to speak to him and console him, but, remembering that he was undressed, he thought better of it, went back and sat down to bathe himself in the icy air, and to look at the silent, foreign-looking cross, so full of meaning to him, and at the brilliant yellow star poised above it. Toward 7 o'clock the men polishing the floors began to make a noise. The bells rang for early morning service, and Levin began to feel that he was taking cold. He closed the window, made his toilet, and went out. End of chapter 14. Part 4, Chapter 15 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. The streets were still deserted. Levin walked to the Shtcherbatskys' house. The principal entrance was still closed, and everyone was asleep. He returned to the hotel, went to his room, and asked for coffee. The day watchman, and not Yegor, brought it to him. Levin wished to enter into conversation with him, but someone rang for him, and he went out. Then Levin tried to take his coffee, and put a piece of kolach into his mouth, but his mouth did not know what to do with the bread. He eschewed it and put on his overcoat, and went out to walk again. It was just 10 o'clock when he reached the Shtcherbatskys' steps for the second time. They were beginning to get up. The cook was going to market. He would have to wait at least 2 hours longer. Levin had passed the whole night and the morning completely oblivious of the material conditions of existence. He had neither eaten nor slept, had been exposed, with almost no clothing, to the cold for several hours, and he not only was fresh and hearty, but he was unconscious of his body. He moved without using his muscles, and felt capable of doing anything. He was persuaded that he could fly through the air, or jump over the top of a house, if it were necessary. He roamed about the streets, to pass away the time, consulting his watch every moment or two, and looking about him. What he saw that day he never saw again. He was particularly struck by the children on their way to school, the dark blue pigeons flying from the roof to the sidewalk, the sacks or little cakes powdered with flour that an invisible hand was arranging in a window. These cakes, the pigeons, and the two little lads were celestial objects. All this happened at once. One of the little lads ran toward a pigeon, and looked at Levin, smiling. The pigeon flapped its wings and flew off glittering in the sunlight through a cloud of fine snow, and the smell of hot bread came through the window where the sacks were displayed. All these things, taken as a whole, produced so lively an impression on Levin that he laughed aloud until the tears came. After going round by the Gazetnya and Kislova streets, he went back to the hotel, sat down, placed his watch before him, and waited till the hands pointed to the hour of noon. In the next room someone was talking about machines and hoaxes, and someone coughed a morning cough. The person did not know that the hour hand was approaching 12. The hour pointed to 12. Levin went to the steps of the hotel. The izvoschiks evidently knew all about it. With happy faces they surrounded him, with eager emulation offering their services. Striving not to offend the others and promising to take them some other time, he made his choice, and ordered the man to drive to the Shtcherbatskys'. The izvoshchik was charming, with his white shirt-collar above his kaftan surrounding his strong red neck. He had a comfortable sleigh, more comfortable than ordinary sleighs, such a sleigh as Levin had never seen before, and the horse was good, and did his best to run, but did not stir from the spot. The izvoshchik knew the Shtcherbatsky house. He stopped before the door flourishing his arms, and turned respectfully toward Levin, saying "Tprou" to his horse. The Shtcherbatskys' Swiss knew all about it, surely. That was plain from the look in his eyes and the way he said, "Well, it is a long time since you have been here, Konstantin Dmitrich." Not only did he know what had happened, but he was full of delight and tried to conceal his joy. Levin felt a shade happier when he caught the old man's good-natured eyes. "Are they up?" "Please come in. Leave that here," added the Swiss, as Levin was turning back to get his cap. That surely had some significance. "To whom shall I announce you, sir?" asked a lackey. This lackey, though young, new in the house, and with some pretension to elegance, was very obliging, very attentive, and he, too, seemed to understand the situation. "To the princess. I mean the prince. No, the young princess," replied Levin. The first person whom he met was Mademoiselle Linon. She was passing through the hall, radiant in her little curls and her shining face. He had hardly spoken to her when the rustling of a dress was heard at the door. Mademoiselle Linon disappeared from before his eyes, and a joyous trepidation at the thought of the happiness so near took possession of him. Mademoiselle Linon hastened away and vanished through another door. She had hardly gone when swift light steps were heard pattering on the inlaid floor, and his happiness, his life, the better part of himself, that which he had yearned for so long, drew near. She did not walk, some invisible power seemed to bring her toward him. He saw only her bright, truthful eyes, filled with the same timid joy of love that filled his own heart. These eyes, shining nearer and nearer to him, almost blinded him with their light of love. She stood before him, almost touching him. Then she placed her two hands gently on his shoulders. She did all she could. She went to him. She gave herself to him, trembling and happy. He folded her in his arms, and pressed his lips to hers, expectant of his kiss. She, too, had not slept at all that night. She had been waiting for him all the morning. Her parents were perfectly agreed and happy in her happiness. She had been on watch for his coming. She wanted to be the first to tell him of their happiness. She was prepared to meet him alone, and she was full of joy at the thought, and yet she was shy and confused, and hardly knew what she was going to do. She had heard his steps and voice, and hid herself behind the door to wait till Mademoiselle Linon had gone. Mademoiselle Linon went. Then, without any delay, without questioning further, she came to him and did as she did. "Now, let us find mamma," said she, taking his hand. For a long time he could not utter a word, not so much because he was afraid of lessening the intensity of his joy by words, but because every time he tried to say anything he felt that instead of words, tears of joy burst forth. His tears choked him. He took her hand and kissed it. "Is it really true?" he said at last in a husky voice. "I cannot believe that you love me." She smiled at the way he used the second person singular, and at the timidity with which he looked at her. "Yes," she replied, slowly lingering on this word. "I am so happy." Without letting go his hand, she went with him into the drawing room. As soon as the princess saw them, she began to breathe fast, and then burst into tears, and then she laughed, and with an energetic movement which Levin was not prepared for, she ran to him, seized his head and kissed him, bedewing his face with her tears. "So all is settled? I am delighted. Love her. I am so glad. For you, Kitty." "It didn't take you long to arrange matters," said the old prince, trying to appear calm, but Levin saw his eyes were full with tears as he looked at him. "It is something I have long been anxious for," said the prince, taking Levin's hand and drawing him toward him. "And even when this little giddy pate thought—" "Papa!" cried Kitty, putting her hand over his mouth. "Well, I won't say anything," said he. "I am very, very how stupid I am!" And he took Kitty in his arms, kissed her face, her hands, and then her face again, blessing her with the sign of the cross. And Levin was filled with a new feeling of affection for the old prince, when he saw how tenderly and fervently Kitty kissed his great, strong hand. End of chapter 15. Part 4, Chapter 16 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. The princess was sitting in her easy chair, silent and beaming. The prince was sitting beside her. Kitty was standing near her father, holding his hand. All of them were silent. The princess was the first to bring their thoughts and feelings back to the affairs of real life, and the transition gave each of them, for a moment, a strange and painful impression. "When shall the wedding be? We must announce the marriage, and have them betrothed, but when shall the wedding be? What do you think about it, Alexander?" "There is the person most interested," said the prince, pointing to Levin. "When?" replied the latter, reddening. "Tomorrow, if you wish my opinion. Today, the betrothal. Tomorrow, the wedding." There, that'll do, mon cher. No nonsense." "Well, in a week then." "One would really suppose that you had lost your senses." "But why not?" "Mercy on us," said the mother, smiling gaily at his impatience. "And the trousseau?" "Is it possible that a trousseau and all the rest are indispensable?" thought Levin, with alarm. "However, neither the trousseau, nor the betrothal, nor anything else can spoil my happiness. Nothing can do that." He looked at Kitty and noticed that the idea of the trousseau did not offend her at all. "It must be very necessary," he said to himself. "I admit that I know nothing about it. I have merely expressed my desire," said he, excusing himself. "We will consider the matter. Now we will have the betrothal and announce the marriage. That is what we will do." The princess stepped up to her husband, kissed him, and was about to move away again, but he held her and kissed her again and again, like a young lover. The two old people seemed agitated and ready to believe that it was not their daughter who was to be married, but themselves. When the prince and princess had gone out, Levin approached his fiancée and took her hand. He had regained his self-possession and could speak. He had many other things on his mind to tell her, but he did not say at all what he intended to say. "I knew that it would be like this. At the bottom of my heart I was sure of it, without ever daring to hope. I believe that it was predestined." "And I," replied Kitty, "even when—" she hesitated, then continued, looking at him resolutely out of her sincere eyes, "even when I rejected my happiness. I never loved anybody but you. I was led away. I ought to tell you. I must ask you. Can you forget it?" "Perhaps it was best that it should be so. You, too, will have to pardon me, for I must confess to you—" This was one of the things he had on his mind to tell her. He had decided to confess everything to her, from his earliest life. First, that he was not so pure as she, and then that he was not a believer. This was cruel, but he thought it his duty to make these confessions to her. "No, not now. Later," said he. "Very well, later. But be sure to tell me. I am not afraid of anything. I want to know all, everything, now it is decided." "Is it decided," he interrupted, "that you take me just as I am? You do not take back your word?" "No, oh no." Their conversation was interrupted by Mademoiselle Linon, who, trying to look properly serious, came to congratulate her favorite pupil. She had not left the drawing room before the servants came to offer their congratulations. Next came the relatives and friends, and this was the beginning of that absurdly happy period from which Levin did not emerge till the day after his marriage. Although he felt constrained and ill at ease all the time, yet the force of his happiness kept increasing. He felt all the time that much which he knew nothing about would be required of him, and he did everything that he was told to do, and all this served to increase his joy. He imagined that his engagement would not be in the least like others, that the ordinary conditions of an engagement would destroy his especial happiness. But it came about that he did exactly as everybody else did in such cases, and his happiness for this very reason kept increasing, and grew more and more peculiar, and did not change, and was in no respect like that of other men. "Now," said Mademoiselle Linon, "we shall have all the candy we wish for." And Levin ran to buy candy. "Well, very glad," said Sviazhsky. "I advise you to get your bouquets at Fomin's." "Do you?" said Levin, and he went to Fomin's. His brother told him he would have to borrow money because there would be many expenses for presents and other things. "For presents? Really?" And he started off on the run to buy jewelry at Fulda's. At the confectioner's, at Fomin's, at Fulda's, he found that every one expected him, and every one seemed glad and rejoiced in his happiness, as did every one with whom he had to do those days. It was an extraordinary thing that not only did they all love him, but, strange as it may seem, even those who before had seemed cold, unsympathetic, and indifferent approved of him in every way, treated his feelings with delicacy and gentleness, and shared his convictions that he was the happiest man in the world, because his "bride" was the pink of perfection. Kitty also had the same feeling. When the Countess Nordstone alluded to the more brilliant hopes that she had conceived for her friend, Kitty became angry, and declared so vehemently that no one in the world could be better than Levin, that the countess had to confess it, and when Kitty was present she never met Levin without smiling enthusiastically. The confession which he had promised was a very trying incident of this period. He consulted the old prince, and, acting on his advice, Levin gave Kitty his journal in which were written out all the matters that troubled him. He had written this diary purposely to show to the one whom he should marry. 2 things tormented him: his sins against virtue and his unbelief. The confession of his unbelief passed almost unnoticed. She was religious, and had never doubted the truth of her religion, but her lover's superficial skepticism did not trouble her very much. She knew through love his whole soul, and in his soul found all that she wanted. It was of little importance to her that he termed the state of his soul incredulity. But the second acknowledgment caused her to shed bitter tears. Levin had a great struggle with himself before he decided to let her read his diary. He knew that between him and her there could be and should be no secrets, and therefore he resolved that he must do it, but he did not realize what an effect it would have on a young girl. Only when, as he entered Kitty's room one evening before going to the theater, and saw her lovely face bathed in tears, and unhappy with the irreparable woe that he had caused, did he perceive the abyss that separated his shameful past from her dove-like purity, and he was horror-stricken at what he had done. "Take back these terrible papers! Take them back!" she said, pushing away the sheets lying on the table. "Why did you give them to me? However, perhaps it was for the best," she added, seized with pity at the sight of Levin's despairing face. "But it is terrible, terrible!" He hung his head and had nothing to say. "You will not forgive me," he murmured. "Yes, I have forgiven you, but it is terrible." However, his happiness was so immense that this confession did not diminish it, but only served to add a shade more to it. She forgave him. From that time he counted himself still more unworthy of her. Morally he bowed down still lower before her, and treasured the happiness that he had gained still higher. He understood the worth of it still better after this pardon. End of chapter 16. Part 4, Chapter 17 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. When he returned to his lonely room, Alexey Alexandrovitch involuntarily recalled, little by little, the conversations that had taken place at the dinner and in the evening. Darya Alexandrovna's words about pardon merely aroused his vexation. Whether he should apply the Christian rule to his case or not was a question too difficult to be lightly decided. Besides, he had already considered this question and decided it in the negative. Of all that had been said that day, the remark of that good stupid, Turotsuin, had made the liveliest impression on his mind. He did bravely, for he challenged the other man and killed him. Evidently all approved this conduct, although out of politeness they had not said so openly. "However the matter is ended, it is useless to think about it," said Alexey Alexandrovitch to himself, and giving no more thought to anything except the preparations for his departure and his tour of inspection, he went to his room and asked the Swiss who showed him the way if he had seen his valet. The Swiss said his valet had only just gone out. Alexey Alexandrovitch ordered tea to be brought, and sitting down at the table opened a railway guide and began to study the departure of trains for his journey. "2 telegrams," said his valet, returning and coming into the room. "Will your Excellency please excuse me, I have only just stepped out." Alexey Alexandrovitch took the telegrams and opened them. The first announced the nomination of Stremov to the place for which he had been ambitious. Alexey Alexandrovitch threw down the dispatch, and with a flushed face began to walk back and forth through the room. "Quo vult pedere dementat," said he, applying quo to all those who had taken part in this nomination. He was not disturbed by the fact that he himself had not been nominated, that he had evidently been outwitted. But it was incomprehensible to him, amazing, that they could not see that Stremov, that babbler, that speechifier, was the least fitted of all men for the place. Could they not understand that they were ruining themselves, that they were destroying their prestige by such a choice? Some more news of the same sort, he thought, with bitterness as he opened the second telegram. It was from his wife. Her name, Anna, in blue pencil, was the first thing that struck his eyes. "I am dying. I beg you to come. I shall die easier if I have your forgiveness." He read these words with scorn and threw the paper on the floor. That there was some piece of trickery, some deception, in this, admitted of no doubt in his mind at first thought. There is no deceitfulness of which she is not capable. She must be on the eve of her confinement, and it is her sickness. But what can be her object? To legalize the child? To compromise me? To prevent the divorce? But what does it mean, "I am dying"? He reread the telegram, and suddenly realized its full meaning. If it is true, if the suffering, the approach of death, have caused her to repent sincerely, and if I should call this pretense, and refuse to go to her, that would not only be cruel, but foolish, and all would blame me. "Pyotr, order a carriage. I am going to Petersburg," said he to the valet. Alexey Alexandrovitch decided to go to Petersburg and to see his wife. If her illness was a pretense, he would say nothing and go away again. On the other hand, if she were really ill unto death, and wanted to see him before she died, he would forgive her, and, if he reached her too late, he could at least pay his last respects to her. During the journey he gave no more thought of what he should do. Alexey Alexandrovitch, tired and dusty with his night in the coach, reached Petersburg in the midst of the early morning. He rode along the still deserted Nevsky Prospect, looking straight before him, without thinking of what was awaiting him at home. He could not think about it, because as soon as he tried to imagine what might be, he could not drive away the suggestion that his wife's death would put a sudden end to all difficulties of his situation. The bakers, the closed shops, the night isvostchiks, the dvorniks sweeping the sidewalks, all passed like a flash before his eyes. He noticed everything, in his endeavors to stifle the thought of what was before him, of what he dared not hope for, and yet hoped for. He reached his house. An isvostchik and a carriage with a coachman asleep were standing before the door. As he entered the vestibule, Alexey Alexandrovitch, as it were, snatched at a decision from the most hidden recess of his brain and succeeded in mastering it. It was to this effect: "If she has deceived me, I will be calm and go away again. But if she has told the truth, I will do what is proper." The Swiss opened the door even before Alexey Alexandrovitch rang the bell. The Swiss Petrov, known as Kapitanuitch, presented a strange appearance, dressed in an old coat and slippers, without any cravat. "How is the Barowinya?" In the night there was a change for the better. Alexey Alexandrovitch stopped short and turned very pale. He now realized how deeply he had hoped for her death. "And how is she?" Karnai, the servant in morning dress, came quickly down the stairs. "Very low," he said. "There was a consultation yesterday, and the doctor is here now." "Take my things," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, a little comforted to learn that there was still hope of death, and he went into the reception room. A uniform overcoat hung in the hall. Alexey Alexandrovitch noticed it, and asked, "Who is here?" "The doctor, the nurse, and Count Vronsky." Alexey Alexandrovitch went through the inner rooms. There was no one in the drawing room, but the sound of his steps brought the nurse, in a cap with lilac ribbons, out of the boudoir. She came to Alexey Alexandrovitch and, taking him by the hand, with the familiarity that the approach of death permits, led him into the sleeping room. "Thank the Lord that you have come. She talks of nothing but you, always of you," she said. "Bring some ice, quick," said the imperative voice of the doctor from the chamber. Alexey Alexandrovitch went into her boudoir. On a little low chair by her table sat Vronsky weeping, his face covered with his hands. He started at the sound of the doctor's voice, uncovered his face, and saw Alexey Alexandrovitch. The sight of the husband disturbed him so much that he sat back in his chair, crouching his head down between his shoulders, as if he wanted to disappear out of sight. Then, making a great effort, he rose and said, "She is dying. The doctors say that there is no hope. I am in your power. Only allow me to remain here. I will conform to your wishes in every other respect. When he saw Vronsky in tears, Alexey Alexandrovitch felt the involuntary tenderness that the sufferings of others always caused him, and he turned away his head without replying, and went to the door. Anna's voice could be heard from the sleeping room, lively, gay, and with clear intonations. Alexey Alexandrovitch went in and approached her bed. She was lying with her face turned toward him. Her cheeks were bright red, her eyes brilliant. Her little white hands coming out of the sleeves of her nightdress were playing with the corner of the coverlet. Not only did she seem fresh and well, but in the happiest frame of mind. She talked fast and loud, accenting her words with precision and nicety. "Because Alexey, I am speaking of Alexey Alexandrovitch. Strange, isn't it? And cruel, that both should be named Alexey. Alexey would not have refused me. I should have forgotten. He would have forgiven. Yes, why does he not come? He is good. He himself does not know how good he is. Ah, bozhe moi, what agony! Give me some water, quick. Ah, but that is not good for her, my little daughter. Well, then, very good. Give her to the nurse. I am willing, that she will be even better. Now when he comes, she will be hateful in his sight. Take her away." Anna Arkadyevna, he has come. Here he is," said the nurse, trying to draw her attention to Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Oh, what nonsense!" continued Anna, without seeing her husband. "There, give the little one to me. Give her to me. He hasn't come yet. You pretend that he will not forgive me because you do not know him. No one knows him. I alone. His eyes. One must know them. Serosa's are very like them. That is why I can no longer look at them. Has Serosa had his dinner? I know he will be forgotten. Oh, do not forget him. Let Serosa be brought into the corner chamber, and let Marietta sleep near him." Suddenly she shrank back and was silent, and, with a look of terror, raised her arms above her head as if to ward off a blow. She had recognized her husband. "No, no," she said quickly. "I'm not afraid of him. I'm afraid of dying. Alexey, come here. I'm in a hurry, because there's no time to be lost. I've only a few minutes to live. The fever will be upon me again, and I shall know nothing more. Now I am conscious. I understand everything, and I see everything." Alexey Alexandrovitch's wrinkled face expressed acute suffering. He took her hand, and he wanted to speak, but his lower lip trembled so that he could not utter a word, and his emotion hardly allowed him to glance at the dying woman. Every time that he turned his head toward her, he saw her eyes fixed on him with a humility and enthusiastic affection which he had never seen there before. "Wait, you do not know. Wait, wait." She stopped to collect her thoughts. "Yes," she began again. "Yes, yes, yes. This is what I want to say. Do not be astonished. I am always the same. But there is another I within me. Her I fear. It is she who loved him, and hated you. And I could not forget what I had once been. That was not I. Now I am myself entirely, really myself, and not another. I am dying. I know that I am dying. Ask him if I am not. I feel it now. There are those terrible weights on my hand and my feet and on my fingers. My fingers? They are enormous. But all that will soon be over. One thing only is indispensable to me. Forgive me. Forgive me wholly. I am a sinner, but Serosa's nurse told me that there was a holy martyr. What was her name? Who was worse than I? I will go to Rome. There is a desert there. I shall not trouble anybody there. I will only take Serosa and my little daughter. No, you cannot forgive me. I know very well that it is impossible. Go away. Go away. You are too perfect." She held him with one of her burning hands and pushed him away with the other. Alexey Alexandrovitch's emotion had been all the time increasing, and now it reached such a degree that he could no longer control himself. He suddenly felt that what he had considered his spiritual discord was, on the contrary, a blessed state of the soul which imparted to him what seemed like a new and hitherto unknown happiness. He had not believed that the Christian law, which he had taken for a guide in life, ordered him to forgive and love his enemies. But now his soul was filled with joyous love and forgiveness to his enemies. He knelt beside the bed. He laid his forehead on her arm, the fever of which burned through the sleeve, and sobbed like a child. She bent toward him, placed her arm around her husband's bald head, and raised her eyes defiantly and proudly. "There, I knew that it would be so. Now farewell. Farewell all. They are coming back again. Why don't they go away? There, take off all these furs from me." The doctor disengaged her arms, laid her back gently on her pillows, and drew the covering over her. Anna made no resistance, looking all the while straight before her, with shining eyes. "Remember that I have only asked your pardon. I ask nothing more. Why doesn't he come?" she said, suddenly looking toward the door, toward Vronsky. "Come. Come here and give me your hand." Vronsky came to the side of the bed and, when he saw Anna, he hid his face in his hands again. "Uncover your face. Look at him. He is a saint," said she. "Yes. Uncover your face. Look at him," she repeated in an irritated manner. "Alexey Alexandrovitch, uncover his face. I want to see him." Alexey Alexandrovitch took Vronsky's hands and uncovered his face, disfigured by the expression of suffering and humiliation which it wore. "Give him your hand. Forgive him." Alexey Alexandrovitch held out his hand to him, without trying to keep back the tears. "Thank the Lord, thank the Lord," said she. "Now everything is right. I will stretch out my feet a little like that. That is better. How ugly those flowers are. They do not look like violets," she said, pointing to the hangings in her room. "Bose moi, when will this be over? Give me some morphine, doctor, some morphine. Bose moi. And she tossed about on the bed. The doctor said that this was perpetual fever, and that there was not one chance in 100 of her living. All that day there was fever, with alleviations of delirium and unconsciousness. Toward midnight she lay unconscious, and her heart had almost ceased to beat. The end was expected every moment. Vronsky went home, but he came back the next morning to learn how she was. Alexey Alexandrovitch came to meet him in the reception room and said to him, "Stay, perhaps she will ask for you." Then he himself took him to his wife's boudoir. In the morning the restlessness, the rapidity of thought and speech returned, but soon unconsciousness intervened again. The third day was much the same, and the doctors began to hope. On this day Alexey Alexandrovitch went to the boudoir where Vronsky was, closed the door, and sat down in front of him. "Alexey Alexandrovitch," said Vronsky, feeling that an explanation was at hand, "I cannot speak. I cannot think. Have pity on me. Hard as it may be for you, believe me, it is still more terrible for me." He was going to rise, but Alexey Alexandrovitch prevented him and said, "Pray listen to me. It is unavoidable. I am forced to explain to you the feelings that guide me, and will continue to guide me, that you may avoid making any mistake in regard to me. You know that I have decided on a divorce, and that I have taken preliminary steps to obtain one. I will not deny that at first I was undecided. I was in torment. I confess that the desire to avenge myself on you and on her pursued me. When I received the telegram, I came home. I felt the same desire. I will say more. I wished for her death. But—" He was silent for a moment, considering whether he would wholly reveal his thoughts. "But I have seen her, and I have forgiven her. The happiness I feel at being able to forgive clearly shows me my duty. I have absolutely forgiven her. I desire to offer the other cheek to the smiter. I wish to give my cloak to him who has robbed me of my coat. I only ask one thing of God, that he will not take away from me this joy of forgiving." Tears filled his eyes. Vronsky was amazed at the calm, luminous face. "This is my position. You may drag me in the mire, and make me the laughing stock of creation, but I will not give up Anna for that, nor will I utter a word of reproach to you," continued Alexey Alexandrovitch. "My duty seems clear and plain to me. I must remain with her. I shall remain with her. If she wishes to see you, I shall inform you of it. But now I think it will be better for you to go away." He rose. Sobs choked his voice. Vronsky rose too, and, standing with bowed head and humble attitude, looked up at Karenin without a word to say. He was incapable of understanding Alexey Alexandrovitch's feelings, but he felt that this was something too high for him, something even unapproachable for a person who looked on the world as he did. End of chapter 17. Part 4, Chapter 18 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. After this conversation with Alexey Alexandrovitch, Vronsky went out on the steps of the Karenin house and stopped, hardly knowing where he was and what he had to do. He felt humiliated, perplexed, and deprived of all means of washing away his shame. He felt thrown out of the path where till now he had walked proudly and easily. All the rules which had been the guides of his life, and which he had believed irreproachable, proved false and untrue. The deceived husband, whom he had considered a melancholy character, an accidental obstacle, at times absurd, happily for him had suddenly been raised by her to a height inspiring respect. And this husband on this height appeared not ugly, not false, not ridiculous, but good, grand, and generous. Vronsky could not understand it. Their roles had suddenly been interchanged. He felt Karenin's grandeur and straightforwardness, and his own baseness and falsity. He felt that this husband was magnanimous in his grief, while he himself seemed little and miserable in his deception. But this consciousness of inferiority, in comparison to a man whom he had unjustly scorned, constituted only a small part of his grief. He felt profoundly unhappy from the fact that his passion for Anna, which of late had as it seemed to him grown cold, was more violent than ever now that he knew he was to lose her. During her illness he had seen her as she was, had learned to know her very soul, and it seemed to him that he had never really loved her till now. He must lose her just as he had come to know her and love her truly. Lose her and be left with the most humiliating recollections. More horrible than anything else was his ridiculous and odious position when Alexey Alexandrovitch had uncovered his face while he was hiding it in his hands. Standing motionless on the steps of the Karenin house, he seemed to be entirely unconscious of what he was doing. "Shall I call an isvostchik?" asked the Swiss. "Yes, an isvostchik." When he reached home, after 3 sleepless nights, Vronsky, without undressing, threw himself down on a divan, folded his arms, and laid his head on them. His head was heavy. The strangest reminiscences, thoughts, and impressions succeeded one another in his mind with extraordinary rapidity and clearness. Now it was a drink which he poured out and gave the invalid from a spoon. Now he saw the nurse's white hands. Then Alexey Alexandrovitch's singular attitude as he knelt on the floor by the bed. "Sleep and forget," he said to himself with the calm resolution of a man in good health who knows that when he feels tired he can sleep if he will. His ideas became confused. He felt himself falling into the abyss of forgetfulness. The billows of the sea of unconscious life were already beginning to swell over his head, when suddenly something like a violent electric shock passed through him. He started up so abruptly that his body bounded upon the springs of the divan, and he found himself in his terror on his knees. His eyes were as wide open as if he had not slept at all. The heaviness of his head, and the lassitude which he felt in all his members but a moment before, had suddenly vanished. "You may drag me in the mire." These words of Alexey Alexandrovitch rang in his ears. He saw him standing before him. He saw, too, Anna's feverish face and her brilliant eyes looking tenderly, not at him, but at Alexey Alexandrovitch. He saw the stupid, ridiculous figure he must have presented when Alexey Alexandrovitch drew away his hands from his face. Again he threw himself back on the divan and closed his eyes. "Sleep and forget," he repeated to himself. But though his eyes were closed, he saw clearer than ever Anna's face, just as it looked on that memorable evening of the races. "It's impossible, and will not be. How can she efface this from her memory? I cannot live without this. But how can we be reconciled? How can we be reconciled?" He unconsciously pronounced these words aloud, and their mechanical repetition for some minutes prevented the recollections and forms which besieged his brain from returning. But the repetition of the words did not long deceive his imagination. Again, one after the other, with extraordinary swiftness, the sweet moments of the past and his recent humiliation began to arise in his mind. "Uncover his face," said Anna's voice. He took away his hands and realized how humiliated and ridiculous he must have appeared. He still lay there trying to sleep, though he felt that there was not the slightest hope of it, and repeating in a whisper some formula with the design of driving away the new and distressing hallucinations that kept arising. He listened to his own voice repeating with a strange persistence, "You did not know how to appreciate her. You did not know how to value her. You did not know how to appreciate her. You did not know how to value her." "What is going to happen to me? Am I going mad?" he asked himself. Perhaps so. Why do people go mad? And why do they commit suicide? And, while he was answering himself, he opened his eyes, and was surprised to see at his head a cushion embroidered by Varya, his brother's wife. He lightly touched the tassel of the cushion, and tried to fix the thought of Varya in his mind, and how she looked the last time he saw her. But any idea foreign to what tormented him was still more intolerable. No, I must sleep. He placed the cushion under his head, but it required an effort to keep his eyes closed. He leaped to his feet and sat down. All is over with me. What else can I do? And his imagination vividly pictured what life without Anna would be. Ambition, Serpukhowskoy, the world, the court. No more these had power to stop him. All this once had some meaning, but now it had none. He rose from the divan, took off his coat, loosened his necktie and bared his shaggy chest that he might breathe more freely, and began to stride up and down the room. "This makes people insane," he repeated. "This causes suicide. To avoid disgrace," he added slowly. He went to the door and closed it. Then, with a look of determination, and with his teeth set, he went to the table, took out his revolver, examined it, turned the loaded chamber round, and stopped to consider. He stood motionless for 2 minutes, with the revolver in his hand, his head bowed in the attitude of intense thought. "Of course," he said to himself, as if a logical sequence of clear and exact ideas led him to this unquestionable decision. But in reality this to him conclusive "of course" was only the consequence of a continued circle of recollections and impressions which he had gone over for the 10th time in the last hour. There were the same recollections of happiness lost for ever, the conception of the meaninglessness of all that was now before him in life, the same consciousness of his shame. There was the same repetition of these impressions and thoughts. "Of course," he repeated, when for the 3rd time his mind directed itself to the same enchanted circle of thoughts and recollections, and holding the revolver to the left side of his breast, with an unflinching grip he pulled the trigger. He did not hear the sound of the report, but the violent blow that he received in the chest knocked him over. He tried to save himself by catching hold of the table. He dropped his revolver, staggered, and fell on the floor, looking about him with astonishment. He could not recognize his room, the twisted legs of the table, the waste paper basket, the tiger skin on the floor. All seemed strange to him. The quick steps of his servant running to the drawing room obliged him to get control of himself. He collected his thoughts with an effort, and seeing that he was on the floor, and that blood was on his hands and on the tiger skin, he realized what he had done. "What stupidity! I missed my aim," he muttered, feeling round for his pistol. It was quite near him, but he could not find it. As he continued to grope for it, he lost his balance and fell again, bathed in his own blood. His valet, an elegant person with side whiskers, who complained freely to his friends about his delicate nerves, was so frightened at the sight of his master lying on the floor that he let him lie bleeding and ran for help. In an hour, Varya, Vronsky's sister-in-law, arrived, and with the assistance of the 3 doctors whom she sent for in all directions, and who all came at once, she succeeded in putting the wounded man to bed, and established herself as his nurse. End of chapter 18. Part 4, Chapter 19 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Alexey Alexandrovitch when he prepared to see his wife again, had not foreseen the contingency of her repentance being genuine, and then of her recovery after she had obtained his pardon. This mistake appeared to him in all its seriousness 2 months after his return from Moscow. But the mistake which he had made proceeded not only from the fact that he had not foreseen this eventuality, but also from the fact that not until the day when he looked on his dying wife had he understood his own heart. Beside the bed of his dying wife he had given way, for the first time in his life, to that feeling of sympathy for the griefs of others, against which he had always fought as one fights against a dangerous weakness. His pity for her, and remorse at having wished for her death, but above all the joy of forgiving, had made him suddenly feel, not only a complete alleviation of his sufferings, but also a spiritual calmness such as he had never before experienced. He suddenly felt that the very thing that had been a source of anguish was now the source of his spiritual joy. What had seemed insoluble when he was filled with hatred and anger became clear and simple now that he loved and forgave. He had pardoned his wife, and he pitied her because of her suffering and repentance. He had forgiven Vronsky, and he pitied him too, especially after he heard of his desperate act. He also pitied his son more than before, because he felt that he had neglected him. But what he felt for the newborn child was more than pity, it was almost tenderness. At first, solely from a feeling of pity, he looked after this little newborn girl who was not his daughter, and who was so neglected during her mother's illness that she would have surely died if he had not taken her in charge, and before he was aware of it, he became attached to her. He would go several times a day into the nursery and sit there so that the wet nurse and the bonne, though they were a little intimidated at first, gradually became accustomed to his presence. He stayed sometimes for half an hour, silently gazing at the saffron red, wrinkled, downy face of the sleeping child, following her motions as she scowled and puckered her lips, watching her rub her eyes with the back of her little hands, curling up her round fingers. And at these moments especially, Alexey Alexandrovitch felt calm and at peace with himself, seeing nothing abnormal in his situation, nothing that he felt the need of changing. However, as time went on, he felt more and more that he would not be permitted to remain in this situation, however natural it seemed to him, and that nobody would allow it. He felt that, besides the holy and spiritual force that guided his soul, there was another force, brutal, equally if not more powerful, which directed his life, and that this power would not give him the peace that he desired. He felt that everyone was looking at him and questioning his attitude, not understanding it, and expecting him to do something. Especially he felt the unnaturalness and constraint of his relations with his wife. When the tenderness which she felt at the expectation of death had passed away, Alexey Alexandrovitch began to notice how Anna feared him, how she dreaded his presence, and did not dare to look him in the face. She seemed to be always pursued by a thought she dared not express, and as if she had a presentiment that their present relations could not last, she too expected some move from her husband. Toward the end of February, the little girl, who had been named Anna for her mother, was taken ill. In the morning Alexey Alexandrovitch had seen her in the nursery, and, after he had left orders about calling the doctor, he went to the ministry meeting. Having transacted his business, he returned at 4 o'clock. As he entered the anteroom, he noticed an Adonis of a lackey, in livery and bearskin cloak, holding a white rotonda, or mantle, lined with American fox. "Who is here?" he asked. "The Princess Yelizaveta Fyodorovna Tverskaya," replied the lackey with a smile, as it seemed to Alexey Alexandrovitch. All through this painful period Alexey Alexandrovitch noticed that his society friends, especially the women, showed a very marked interest in him and in his wife. He noticed in them all that veiled look of amusement which he saw in the lawyer's eyes, and which he now saw in the lackey's. They all seemed delighted, as if they were going to a wedding. When people met him and inquired after his health, they did so with the same half-concealed hilarity. The presence of the Princess Tverskaya was not agreeable to Alexey Alexandrovitch, both because he had never liked her, and because she had called up unpleasant memories, and so he went directly to the nursery. In the first room, Sir Rosa, leaning on a table, with his feet in a chair, was drawing and chattering merrily. The English governess, who had replaced the French woman soon after Anna's illness, was sitting near the child, with her fancy work in her hand. She rose, made a curtsy, and put Sir Rosa's feet down. Alexey Alexandrovitch smoothed his son's hair, answered the governess's questions about his wife's health, and asked what the doctor said about baby. The doctor said that it was nothing serious. He ordered baths, sir. She is in pain, nevertheless, said Alexey Alexandrovitch, hearing the child cry in the next room. I believe, sir, that the wet nurse does not suit her, replied the Englishwoman decidedly. What makes you think so? He asked, as he paused on his way. It was the same at the Countess Falls, sir. They dosed the child with medicine while it was merely suffering from hunger, sir. The wet nurse has not enough milk for it. Alexey Alexandrovitch considered for a few moments, and then went into the adjoining room. The child was crying as she lay in her nurse's arms, with her head thrown back, refusing the full breast that was offered her, and screaming without yielding to the blandishments of the two women bending over her. Isn't she any better? Asked Alexey Alexandrovitch. She is very worrisome, replied the old nurse in a whisper. Miss Edwards says that perhaps the nurse hasn't enough milk for her, said he. I think so too, Alexey Alexandrovitch. Why haven't you said so? Whom should I say it to? Anna Arkadyevna is still ill, replied the old nurse discontentedly. The old nurse had been in the family a long time, and these simple words struck Alexey Alexandrovitch as an allusion to his position. The child cried harder and harder, losing its breath and becoming hoarse. The old nurse threw up her hands in despair, took the little one from the wet nurse, and rocked her as she walked back and forth. You must ask the doctor to examine the wet nurse, said Alexey Alexandrovitch. The wet nurse, a healthy-looking woman of fine appearance, sprucely dressed, who was afraid of losing her position, muttered to herself as she fastened her dress over her great bosom, smiling scornfully at the doubt of her not having enough nourishment. In her smile Alexey Alexandrovitch also detected ridicule of his position. Poor little thing, said the old nurse, trying to hush the child and still walking back and forth. Alexey Alexandrovitch sat down in a chair, sad and crestfallen, and followed the old nurse with his eyes as she walked up and down with the child. When at last she had pacified it and placed it in the cradle, and having arranged the little pillow had moved away, Alexey Alexandrovitch rose and went up to it on tiptoe. For a moment he was silent and looked with melancholy face at the little thing, but suddenly a smile which moved his hair and the skin on his forehead spread over his face, and he quietly left the room. He went into the dining room, rang the bell, and ordered the servant that answered it to send for the doctor again. He was displeased because his wife seemed to take so little interest in this charming baby, and in this state of annoyance he wished neither to go to her room nor to meet the Princess Betsy. But his wife might wonder why he did not come as usual. He crushed down his feelings and went to her chamber. As he walked along toward the door on a thick carpet, he unintentionally overheard a conversation which he would not have cared to hear. If he were to go away, I should understand your refusal, and his also. But your husband ought to be above that, said Betsy. It is not for my husband's sake, but my own, that I don't wish it. Say nothing more about it, replied Anna's agitated voice. Yes, but you can't help wanting to say good-bye to the man who shot himself on your account. That is the very reason I do not wish to see him again. Alexey Alexandrovitch, with an expression of fear and guilt, stopped, and started to go away without being heard. But, considering that this would lack dignity, he turned round again and, coughing, went toward the chamber. The voices were hushed, and he went into the room. Anna, in a grey calotte, with her dark hair cut short on her round head, was sitting in a reclining chair. All her animation disappeared, as usual, at the sight of her husband, and she bowed her head and glanced uneasily at Betsy. Betsy, dressed in the latest fashion, with a little hat perched on the top of her head, like a cap over a lamp, in a dove-coloured gown, trimmed with bright-coloured bands on the waist on one side, and on the skirt on the other, was sitting beside Anna. She sat up as straight as possible, and welcomed Alexey Alexandrovitch with a nod and a sarcastic smile. "Ah," she began, affecting surprise, "I'm delighted to meet you at home. You never show yourself anywhere, and I haven't seen you since Anna was taken ill. I learned of your anxiety from others. Indeed, you are a wonderful husband," she said, with a significant and flattering look, as much as to say that she conferred on him the "order" of magnanimity on account of his behaviour toward his wife. Alexey Alexandrovitch bowed coldly, and, kissing his wife's hand, inquired how she was. "Better, I think," she replied, avoiding his look. "However, your face has a feverish look," he said, emphasizing the word feverish. "We have talked too much," said Betsy. "It was selfish on my part, and I am going now." She rose, but Anna, suddenly flushing, seized her quickly by the arm. "No, stay, I beg of you. I must tell you. No, you." She addressed Alexey Alexandrovitch, while the colour increased on her neck and brow. "I cannot, nor do I wish to, hide anything from you," she said. Alexey Alexandrovitch cracked his knuckles and bent his head. "Betsy has told me that Count Vronsky wishes to come to our house and say good-bye before he goes to Tashkend." She did not look at her husband, and she evidently was in haste to get through with it, however hard it might be. "I have said that I could not receive him." "You said, my dear, that it would depend on Alexey Alexandrovitch," corrected Betsy. "Yes. No, I cannot see him, and it would not do any—" She stopped suddenly and looked inquiringly at her husband's face. He was not looking at her. "In short, I do not wish—" Alexey Alexandrovitch approached and wanted to take her hand. Anna's first impulse was to withdraw her hand from her husband's clammy hand with its big swollen veins, but she evidently controlled herself and pressed it. "I am very grateful to you for your confidence, but—" he began, then stopped, awkward and annoyed, feeling that what he could easily and clearly decide when by himself he could not settle in the presence of the Princess Tverskaya, who was the incarnation of that brutal force which he had to take as the guide of his life in the eyes of the world, and obliged him to renounce his feelings of love and forgiveness. He stopped as he looked at the Princess Tverskaya. "Well, good-bye, my treasure," said Betsy, rising. She kissed Anna and went out. Karenin accompanied her. "Alexey Alexandrovitch, I know that you are an extraordinarily magnanimous man," said Betsy, stopping in the midst of the boudoir to press his hand again with unusual fervour. "I am a stranger, and I love her so much, and esteem you so highly, that I take the liberty of giving you a bit of advice. Let him come. Alexey Vronsky is the personification of honour, and he is going to Tashkend." "I thank you for your sympathy and your advice, Princess, but the question whether my wife can or cannot receive anybody is for her to decide." He spoke these words with dignity, raising his eyebrows as usual, but he felt at once that, whatever his words had been, dignity was inconsistent with the situation. The sarcastic and wicked smile with which Betsy greeted his remark proved it beyond a doubt. End of chapter 19. Part 4, Chapter 20 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Alexey Alexandrovitch took leave of Betsy in the hall and returned to his wife. She was lying down, but, hearing her husband's steps, she sat up quickly in her former position, and looked at him in a frightened way. He saw that she had been crying. "I am very grateful to you for your confidence in me," said he, gently, repeating in Russian the remark that he had just made in French before Betsy. When he spoke to her in Russian and used the familiar second person singular "tui," this "tui" irritated Anna in spite of herself. "I am very grateful for your decision, for I agree with you that, since Count Vronsky is going away, there is no necessity of his coming here. Besides—" "Yes, but as I have said that, why repeat it?" interrupted Anna, with an annoyance which she could not control. No necessity, she thought, for a man to say farewell to a woman he loves, for whom he has wished to commit suicide, and who cannot live without him. She pressed her lips together and fixed her flashing eyes on her husband's hands with their swollen veins, as he stood slowly rubbing them together. "We will not say anything more about that," she added more calmly. "I have given you perfect freedom to decide this question, and I am happy to see," Alexey Alexandrovitch began again. "That my desires are in conformity with yours," finished Anna, quickly, exasperated to hear him speak so slowly, when she knew beforehand what he was going to say. "Yes," he affirmed, "and the Princess Tverskaya shows very poor taste to meddle in family affairs. She of all others." "I don't believe what they say about her," said Anna. "I only know that she loves me sincerely." Alexey Alexandrovitch sighed and was silent. Anna played nervously with the tassels of her calotte, and looked at him now and then with that feeling of physical repulsion which she reproached herself for, without being able to overcome. All that she wished for at this moment was to be rid of his distasteful presence. "Ah, I have just sent for the doctor," said Alexey Alexandrovitch. "What for? I am well." "For the baby. The little one cries so much. They think that the nurse hasn't enough nourishment for her." "Why didn't you let me nurse her, when I urged it so? All the same," Alexey Alexandrovitch understood what she meant by all the same. "She is a baby, and they will kill her." She rang and sent for the little one. "I wanted to nurse her, and you wouldn't let me, and now you blame me." "I do not blame you for anything." "Yes, you do blame me. Bozhe moi, why didn't I die?" she began to sob. "Forgive me, I am nervous and unjust," she said, trying to control herself. "But go away." "No, this state of things cannot go on," said Alexey Alexandrovitch to himself as he left his wife's room. Never before had he been so convinced of the impossibility of prolonging such a situation before the world. Never had his wife's dislike of him, and the strength of that mysterious brutal force which had taken possession of his life, to rule it contrary to the needs of his soul, and to make him change his relations to his wife, appeared to him with such clearness. He saw clearly that the world and his wife exacted something from him which he could not fully understand. He felt that it aroused within him feelings of hatred, which disturbed his peace, and destroyed the worth of his victory over himself. Anna, in his opinion, ought to have nothing more to do with Vronsky. But if everybody considered this impossible, he was ready to tolerate their meeting, on condition that the children should not be disgraced, or his own life disturbed. Wretched as this was, it was, nevertheless, better than a rupture whereby she would be placed in a shameful and hopeless position, and he himself would be deprived of all that he loved. But he felt his powerlessness in this struggle, and knew beforehand that all were against him, and that he would be prevented from doing what seemed to him wise and good, and that he would be obliged to do what was bad, but necessary to be done. End of chapter 20. Part 4, Chapter 21 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Betsy had not left the hall when Stepan Arkadyevitch appeared on the threshold. He had come from Eliasev's, where they had just received fresh oysters. "Ah, princess, you here? What a fortunate meeting! I have just been at your house." "The meeting is but for a moment. I am going," replied Betsy, smiling as she buttoned her gloves. "Wait just a moment, princess. Allow me to kiss your little hand before you put on your glove. Nothing pleases me so much in returning to ancient ways as the custom of kissing a lady's hand." He kissed Betsy's hand. "When shall we meet again?" "You don't deserve to see me," replied Betsy, laughing. "Oh, yes, I do, for I have become a very serious man. I regulate not only my own family affairs, but also other people's," said he with a significant expression in his face. "Ah, I am delighted to hear it," replied Betsy, instantly knowing that he referred to Anna. Going back into the hall, they stood in a corner. "He is killing her," she whispered with conviction. "It is impossible, impossible." "I am very glad that you think so," replied Stepan Arkadyevitch, shaking his head with sympathetic commiseration. "That is why I am in Petersburg." "The whole town are talking about it," said she. "This situation is intolerable. She is fading away before our very eyes. He doesn't understand that she is one of those women whose feelings cannot be treated lightly. One of two things. Either he ought to take her away and act decidedly, or else be divorced. But this is killing her." "Yes, yes, exactly," said Oblonsky with a sigh. "I have come for that. That is to say, not entirely for that. I've just been made chamberlain, so I had to show my gratitude, but the main thing was to arrange this matter." "Well, may the Lord help you," said Betsy. Stepan Arkadyevitch accompanied the Princess Betsy to the door, once more kissed her wrist just above her glove, where the pulse beats, and after paying her such an impudent compliment that she did not know whether to laugh or take offence, he left her to go to his sister. He found her in tears. In spite of the exuberance of his lively spirits, Stepan Arkadyevitch fell instantly and with perfect genuineness into the tone of sympathetic and poetical tenderness which suited his sister's frame of mind. He asked how she felt, and how she had passed the day. "Wretchedly, very wretchedly. Night and day, the future, the past, all wretched," she replied. "It seems to me you have yielded to the blues. You must take courage, look life in the face. It is hard, I know, but—" "I've heard that some women love men for their very vices," began Anna suddenly. "But I hate him for his virtue. I cannot live with him. Understand me. The sight of him has a physical effect on me which drives me out of my mind. I cannot live with him. What shall I do? I've been unhappy before, and I thought it impossible to be more so. But this horrible state of things surpasses all that I could have imagined. Can you believe that, though I know how good and perfect he is, and how unworthy of him I am, still I hate him. I hate him for his magnanimity. There's absolutely nothing left for me but to—" She was going to add "die," but Stepan Arkadyevitch did not let her finish. "You are ill and nervous. Believe me. You exaggerate everything. There is really nothing so very terrible." And Stepan Arkadyevitch smiled. No one except Stepan Arkadyevitch, meeting such despair, would have ventured to smile, for it would have seemed rude. But his smile was so full of kindness and an almost effeminate sweetness that, instead of irritating, it was calming and soothing. His gentle soothing words and smile acted like oil of sweet almonds. Anna at once felt the effect. "No, Stiva," said she, "I am lost, worse than lost. And yet I'm not yet lost. I cannot still say that all is over. On the contrary, I feel that all is not yet over. I seem like a cord too tightly stretched, which must break. But the end has not yet come, and it will be terrible. No, no. The cord can be carefully unstrung. There is no difficulty without some way out of it. I have thought it over, and thought it over, and I see only one." Again he saw by her look of dismay that the one way that she meant was death, and again he did not allow her to finish. "No, listen to me. You cannot judge of your position so well as I. Let me tell you frankly my opinion." He smiled again cautiously, with his almond oily smile. "I will begin at the beginning. You married a man 20 years older than yourself, and you married without love, or, at least, without knowing what love was. It was a mistake, as well admit it." "A terrible mistake," said Anna. "But, I repeat it, it was an accomplished fact. You then had, let us say, the misfortune to fall in love, not with your husband. That was a misfortune, but that too was an accomplished fact. Your husband knew it, and forgave it. After each sentence he stopped, as if to give her time to reply, but she said nothing. Now, the question is, can you continue to live with your husband? Do you wish it? Does he wish it? I know nothing about it. Nothing. But you yourself have just said that you could no longer endure him. No, I did not say so. I deny it. I know nothing. I understand nothing. Yes, but allow me. You cannot understand it. I feel that I am precipitated, head first, into an abyss, and I may not save myself. I cannot. You will see that we can prevent you from falling and from being crushed. I understand you. I feel that you are not able to express your feelings, your desires. I desire nothing, nothing, only to end all this. He sees this and knows it. Do you suppose that he doesn't feel the strain as much as you do? You suffer. He suffers. And what way of escape is there from all this torture? Then, when a divorce would settle everything. Stepan Arkadyevitch with difficulty expressed his principal idea, and looked to Anna to see what effect it would have. She said nothing, and shook her head disapprovingly. But by the expression of her face, which suddenly lighted up with something of her former beauty, he saw that, if she did not wish this, it was because the thought of its being realized was too enticing. "I am awfully sorry for you. How happy I should be if I could arrange it for you," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Don't say a word. If God will only permit me to express all that I feel. I am going to find Alexey Alexandrovitch." Anna looked at him out of her brilliant, thoughtful eyes, and did not reply. Chapter 22. Part 4, Chapter 22 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Stepan Arkadyevitch went into his brother-in-law's cabinet, with the solemn face which he tried to assume when he sat in his official chair at a council meeting. Alexey Alexandrovitch, with his arms behind his back, was walking up and down the room, considering the same thing that Stepan Arkadyevitch had been discussing with his wife. "Shall I disturb you?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch, suddenly feeling an unwonted embarrassment. In order to conceal his embarrassment, he took a new cigar case out of his pocket, smelt of the leather, and took out a cigarette. "No. Do you wish to see me?" asked Alexey Alexandrovitch, reluctantly. "Yes. I would like. I must. Yes, I must have a talk with you," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, surprised at his confusion. This feeling was so strange and unexpected to him that he did not recognize in it the voice of conscience, warning him that what he hoped to do was evil. He recovered himself with an effort, and conquered the weakness which took possession of him. "I hope that you believe in my love for my sister, and my sincere sympathy and regard for you," said he, and his face grew red. Alexey Alexandrovitch listened and made no reply, but his face struck Stepan Arkadyevitch by its expression of humility and pain. I came on purpose to speak with you about my sister and the situation in which you and she are placed," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, still struggling with his unusual embarrassment. Alexey Alexandrovitch smiled sadly, looked at his brother-in-law, and, without replying, went to the table, took up a half-written letter, and handed it to him. "I can think of nothing else. This is what I began to write, thinking that I could express myself better in a letter, for my presence irritates her," said he, giving him the letter. Stepan Arkadyevitch took the paper and looked with perplexity and surprise at his brother-in-law's dull eyes, which were fixed on him. Then he read, "I see that my presence is disagreeable to you. Painful as it is for me to recognize it, I know that it is so, and it cannot be otherwise. I do not blame you. God knows that, during your illness, I resolved to forget the past and to begin a new life. I am not sorry. I never shall be sorry for what I did then. I desired only one thing, your salvation, the salvation of your soul, and now I see that I have not succeeded. Tell me yourself what will give you true peace and happiness, and I will submit to whatever you may deem just and right." Stepan Arkadyevitch gave the letter back to his brother-in-law, and with the same perplexity he simply stared at his brother-in-law, not knowing what to say. This silence was so uncomfortable to both that Stepan Arkadyevitch's lips trembled convulsively, while he did not take his eyes from Karenin's face. "That is what I wanted to say to her," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, turning away. Yes, yes," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, but he could not go on, the tears so choked his utterance. "Yes, yes, I understand you." "I should like to know what she wishes," said he at last. "I am afraid that she herself does not realize her own situation. She is not a judge of the matter," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, trying to recover himself. "She is crushed, literally crushed, by your magnanimity. If she should read your letter, she would be unable to say a word, and could only bow her head still lower." "Yes, but what is to be done in such a case? How can it be settled? How can I know what she wishes?" "If you will allow me to express my opinion, I think it is for you to state clearly what measure you believe necessary to put an end to this situation at once." "Consequently, you think it ought to be ended at once?" interrupted Alexey Alexandrovitch. "But how?" he added, passing the back of his hand over his eyes in an unusual way. "I see no possible way out of it." "There is a way out of every difficulty, however serious it may be," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, rising and growing more animated. "There was a time when you wished for divorce. If you are convinced now that you can never be happy together again—" "Happiness may be understood in different ways. Let us grant that I agree to everything, that I have no wishes in the matter. What escape is there from our situation?" "If you wish for my advice," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, with the same smooth, almond-oily, affectionate smile with which he had spoken to his sister, and this smile was so persuasive that Alexey Alexandrovitch, giving himself up to the weakness which overpowered him, was involuntarily inclined to believe what his brother-in-law said. "She will never say what her wishes are, but there is one thing possible, one thing she may hope for," continued Stepan Arkadyevitch, "and that is to break the bonds which are only the cause of cruel recollections. In my opinion, it is indispensable to put your relations on an entirely new footing, and that can only be done by both of you resuming your freedom." "Divorce!" interrupted Alexey Alexandrovitch with disgust. "Yes, I suppose that divorce—" "Yes, divorce," repeated Stepan Arkadyevitch, blushing. "Taking everything into consideration, that is the most sensible course when two married people find themselves in such a situation as yours. What is to be done when a husband and wife find that living together is impossible? This can always be brought about." Alexey Alexandrovitch drew a deep sigh, and covered his eyes. "There is only one consideration, whether one of the parties wishes to marry again. If not, it is very simple," continued Stepan Arkadyevitch, recovering more and more from his feeling of constraint. Alexey Alexandrovitch, with his face distorted by emotion, muttered something to himself, but made no reply. What seemed so simple to Oblonsky he had turned over 1,000 times in his mind, and, instead of finding it very easy, found it utterly impossible. Now that the conditions for divorce were known to him, it seemed to him impossible, because the sense of his personal dignity, as well as his respect for religion, prevented him from confessing to a fictitious accusation of adultery, and still less permitting his wife, whom he had once pardoned and still loved, to be disgraced and put to shame. Divorce seemed impossible from still other and even more important reasons. What would become of their son? To leave him with his mother was impossible. The divorced mother would have her own illegitimate family, in which the child's position and training would be wretched. Should he keep the child for himself? But he knew that would be an act of vengeance, and vengeance he did not want. But, above all, What made divorce impossible in his eyes was the thought that, in consenting to it, he himself would contribute to Anna's destruction. The words spoken by Darya Alexandrovna when he was in Moscow remained graven in his heart, that in getting a divorce he was thinking only of himself and forgetting that it would be her irretrievable ruin. These words, now that he had forgiven her and had become attached to the children, had a very significant meaning to him. To consent to a divorce, to give Anna her liberty, was to cut away the last tie that bound himself to life, to her children whom he loved, and was to take away her last help in the way of salvation, and to push her over the precipice. If she became a divorced woman, he knew very well that she would be united to Vronsky, and such a bond would be criminal and illegal, because a woman, according to the laws of the Church, cannot enter into a second marriage during the lifetime of her husband. And who knows but, after a year or two, either he might abandon her, or she might form a new liaison, thought Alexey Alexandrovitch, and I, having allowed an illegal divorce, should be responsible for her fall. He had gone over all this 100 times, and was convinced that divorce was not by any means so simple as his brother-in-law would make it out, that it was wholly impossible. He did not admit a word of what Stepan Arkadyevitch said. He had 1,000 arguments to refute such reasoning, and, notwithstanding this, he listened, feeling that his words were the manifestation of that irresistible force which ruled his life, and to which he would finally submit. The only question is, how, on what conditions, you will consent to a divorce, for she will never dare to ask anything of you, and will give herself up entirely to your magnanimity. My God, why has this come upon me? Thought Alexey Alexandrovitch, and as he remembered the condition of divorce in which the husband assumed the blame, from shame he buried his face in his hands, as Vronsky had done. You are distressed, I understand it, but if you will consider, whosoever smiteth thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man would take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also, thought Alexey Alexandrovitch. Yes, he cried in his piping voice, I will take all the shame upon myself. I will even give up my son. But will it not be better to leave all that? However, do as you please. And turning away from his brother-in-law, that he might not see his face, he sat down near the window. He was grieved, he was ashamed, but with this grief and shame he felt a sense of happiness and emotion in the consciousness of his own humility. Stepan Arkadyevitch was touched. Alexey Alexandrovitch, be assured that she will appreciate your generosity, said he, after a pause. It is, without doubt, the will of God, he added, but he felt, as soon as the words were out of his mouth, what a foolish remark it was, and he could hardly restrain a smile at his own foolishness. Alexey Alexandrovitch would have replied, but tears prevented him. The trial comes by fate, and it must be accepted. I accept it as an accomplished fact, and I will try to help you and her, said Stepan Arkadyevitch. When Stepan Arkadyevitch left his brother-in-law's cabinet, he was touched, but this fact did not prevent him from being delighted at having settled this matter, for he was certain that Alexey Alexandrovitch would not go back on his word. His satisfaction suggested a conundrum which he could ask his wife and intimate friends. What is the difference between me and a field marshal? The field marshal makes divorces, and nobody is the better for it, while I make divorces, and 3 people are better off. Or, rather, what resemblance is there between me and a field marshal? But by and by I'll improve on it, he said to himself with a smile. End of chapter 22. Part 4, Chapter 23 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Vronsky's wound was dangerous, although it did not reach the heart. He hung for several days between life and death. When for the first time he was in a condition to talk, only Varya, his brother's wife, was in his room. Varya, he said, looking at her gravely, I shot myself accidentally. Now please never speak to me about this, but tell everyone so. Otherwise it will seem too stupid." Varya bent over him without replying, examining his face with a happy smile. His eyes were bright, but no longer feverish, but their expression was stern. "Well, thank the Lord," she replied. "Are you suffering?" "A little on this side," said he, pointing to his chest. "Let me change the dressing then." Squinting, he silently watched her change it, and when she had finished, he said, "I am not delirious now. See to it, I beg of you, that nobody says that I shot myself intentionally." "Nobody says so. I hope, however, that after this you will not shoot yourself accidentally again," she said with a questioning smile. "Probably I shall not, but it would have been better." And he smiled gloomily. In spite of these words and this smile which so alarmed Varya, when the inflammation had subsided and he began to recover, he felt that he was free from a part of his misfortunes. By his action he had washed away, as it were, his shame and humiliation, which had weighed on him before. Henceforth he could think calmly of Alexey Alexandrovitch. He recognized all his magnanimity without being crushed by it. Besides, he was able to be himself again, to look people in the face, and could live, governing himself by his customary habits. What he could not tear from his heart, in spite of all his efforts, was the regret, bordering on despair, at having lost Anna forever, since he was firmly resolved, now that he had redeemed his fault toward Karenin, not to place himself between the repentant wife and her husband. But he could not put out of his heart the regret at the loss of her love. He could not blot out the memory of happy moments which he had spent with her and not have appreciated till now, and which pursued him continually in all their fascination. Serpukhowskoy thought of sending him to Tashkend, and Vronsky accepted the proposition without the least hesitation. But the nearer the time for his leaving came, the more cruel seemed the sacrifice to what he considered his duty. His wound was healed, and he had already gone out and was engaged in making preparations for his journey to Tashkend. To see her once more, and then bury myself and die, he thought, and while paying his farewell visit to Betsy, he expressed his wish to her. The latter sent at once an ambassador to Anna, but brought back her refusal. So much the better, thought Vronsky on receiving her reply. This is a weakness which would have cost me my last strength. The next morning Betsy herself went to Vronsky, announcing that she had, through Oblonsky, positive information that Alexey Alexandrovitch consented to a divorce, and that consequently Vronsky might see Anna. Without finding out when he could see her or where her husband would be, Vronsky immediately went to the Karenins. He flew up the steps, not seeing anything or anyone, and with hasty steps, almost running, entered Anna's room, and, without even noticing whether there might not be someone else in the room, he took her in his arms and began covering her hands, her face, her neck with kisses. Anna was prepared to see him again, and had made up her mind what to say to him, but she had no time to speak. Vronsky's passion overpowered her. She wanted to calm him, to calm herself, but it was already too late. Her lips trembled so that for a long time she was unable to speak a word. "Yes, you have conquered me. I'm yours," she succeeded in saying at last, pressing his hand to her breast. "So it had to be," said he. "As long as we live, it must be so. I know it now." "It is true," she replied, growing paler and paler as she put her arms around Vronsky's neck. "However, there is something terrible in this after what has happened." "All that will be forgotten. Forgotten. We shall be so happy. If there were any need of our love increasing, it would increase, because there is something terrible about it," said he, raising his head and displaying his strong teeth as he smiled. She could only reply with a smile, not with words, with her eyes which expressed such love for him. "I do not know you with your short hair. You are lovely so, just like a little boy. But how pale you are!" "Yes, I am still very weak," she replied, smiling, and her lips began to tremble again. "We will go to Italy. You will grow strong there," said he. "Is it possible that we could live like husband and wife, alone, by ourselves?" said she, looking him in the eye. "I am only surprised at one thing, that it has not always been so." "Stiva says that he will consent to everything, but I will not accept his generosity," said she, looking thoughtfully above Vronsky's head. "I do not wish for a divorce. It is all the same to me now. I only wonder what he will decide with regard to Zarosa." Vronsky could not understand how, in these first moments of their reunion, she could think of her son and of divorce. How could it be all the same to her? "Don't speak of that. Don't think of it," said he, turning Anna's hand over and over in his, to draw her attention to him. But she did not look at him. "Oh, why did I not die? It would have been so much better," said she, and though she did not sob, the tears rolled down her pale cheeks. She tried nevertheless to smile, that she might not give him pain. Once Vronsky would have thought it impossible and disgraceful to give up the flattering and perilous mission to Tashkend, but now he refused it without any hesitation. Then, noticing that his refusal was misinterpreted by the authorities, he gave in his resignation. A month later Alexey Alexandrovitch was left alone with his son, and Anna went abroad with Vronsky, without a divorce, and resolutely refusing to accept one. End of chapter 23, and end of part 4 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. Part 5, Chapter 1 of Anna Karenina. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. Part 5, Chapter 1. The Princess Shtcherbatskaya found it would not be possible to have the wedding before Lent, which would come in 5 weeks, because the trousseau would not be half done. But she could not help agreeing with Levin that after Lent it might be too late, as an old aunt of the prince's was very ill and liable to die, and then mourning would still further postpone it. So having decided to divide the trousseau into 2 parts, one large, the other small, the princess agreed to have the wedding before Lent. She decided that she would prepare the smaller part of the trousseau at once, and send the larger part afterward, and she was very indignant with Levin because he would not answer her seriously whether this would suit him or not. This arrangement was all the more convenient because the young couple intended to set out for the country immediately after the ceremony, and would not need the larger part of the things. Levin continued in the same condition of lunacy, in which it seemed to him that he and his happiness constituted the chief and only aim of creation, and that it was wholly unnecessary for him to think or to bother himself about anything, but that his friends would arrange everything for him. He did not even make any plans or arrangements for his coming life, but left others to decide for him, knowing all would be admirable. His brother, Sergey Ivanovitch, Stepan Arkadyevitch, and the princess ruled him absolutely. He was satisfied to accept whatever they proposed. His brother borrowed the money that he needed. The princess advised him to leave Moscow after the wedding. Stepan Arkadyevitch advised him to go abroad. He consented to everything. "Make whatever plans you please," he thought. "I am happy, and whatever you may decide on, my joy will be neither greater nor less." But when he told Kitty of Stepan Arkadyevitch's suggestion about going abroad, he was surprised to see that she did not approve of it, and that she had her own very decided plans for the future. She knew that Levin's heart was at home in his work, and although she neither understood his affairs nor tried to understand them, still they seemed to her very important. As their home would be in the country, she did not wish to go abroad where they were not going to live, but insisted on settling down in the country where their home was to be. This very firm determination surprised Levin, but as it seemed to him all right, he begged Stepan Arkadyevitch, who had excellent taste, to go to Pokrovsky and take charge of the improvements in his house. It seemed to him that belonged to his friend's province. "By the way," said Stepan Arkadyevitch one day, after his return from the country, where he had arranged everything for the young couple's reception, "have you your certificate of confession?" "No. Why?" "You can't be married without it." "Ai, ai, ai!" cried Levin. "But it is 9 years since I have been to confession. I hadn't even thought of it." "That is good," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, laughing. "And you call me a nihilist? But that can't be allowed to go on. You must prepare for the sacrament." "When? There are only 4 days more." Stepan Arkadyevitch arranged this matter also, and Levin prepared for his devotions. For Levin, as for any man who is an unbeliever, yet respects the faith of others, it was very hard to attend and participate in all religious ceremonies. Now in his tender and sentimental frame of mind, the necessity of dissimulating was not only odious to him, it was well nigh impossible. Now he would be obliged either to lie or to mock at sacred things, at a time when his heart was bursting, when he felt at the height of bliss. He felt that he could do neither. But in spite of all his efforts to persuade Stepan Arkadyevitch that there must be some other way of obtaining a certificate without being forced to confess, Stepan Arkadyevitch declared that it was impossible. "Yes, but what harm will it do you? Only 2 days. And the priest is a capital, bright little old man. He will pull this tooth for you without your knowing it." During the first mass that he attended, Levin did his best to recall the strong religious impressions of his youth, when he was between 16 and 17 years old. But he found that this was perfectly impossible. He then tried to look on religious forms as an ancient custom, without any real meaning, something like the habit of making calls. This also he felt that he could never do. Like most of his contemporaries, Levin was completely undecided in regard to his religious views. He could not believe, at the same time he was not firmly convinced that all these things were unreasonable, and therefore not being in a condition to believe in the efficacy of what he was doing, or to look on it with utter indifference as only an empty formality, he experienced a sense of pain and annoyance during the time allotted to his devotions. His conscience cried out that to do what he himself did not understand was false and wicked. During the time of the service, he listened to the prayers, striving to attribute to them some significance which should not be in too open contradiction with his convictions. But finding that he could not understand them, he was compelled to criticize them. He tried not to listen, but occupied himself with his thoughts, with the observations and recollections that arose in his mind with extraordinary vividness during the solemn night office in the church. He stayed through Mass, Vespers, and evening prayers, and on the next morning he rose earlier than usual, and came at 8 o'clock, without having eaten anything, to morning prayers and confession. There was no one in the church, except a mendicant soldier, 2 old women, and the officiating priests. A young deacon with a long, thin back clearly defined in 2 halves beneath his short cassock came to meet him, and going to a little table near the wall, began to read prayers. Levin, hearing him repeat in a hurried, monotonous tone, clipping his words, the words, "Lord have mercy upon us," felt that his thought was locked up and sealed, and that to touch it and stir it now was out of the question, since, if he did, confusion would ensue. Therefore he stood behind the deacon, not listening and not trying to fathom what he said, but thinking his own thoughts. "What a wonderful amount of expression there is about her hands," he thought, recalling the evening before, which he had spent with Kitty at the table in one corner of the drawing-room. There had not been much to talk about, as was usually the case at this time. She had rested her hand on the table, opening and shutting it, and laughing as she made this motion. He remembered how he had kissed this hand, and then examined the lines that crossed the pink palm. "Have mercy on us again," thought Levin, making the sign of the cross, and bowing while he noticed the deacon's supple movements as he prostrated himself in front of him. Then she took my hand, and in turn examined it. "You have a famous hand," she said to me. He looked at his own hand, and then at the deacon's, with its stubbed fingers. "Yes, now it will soon be over. No, he is beginning another prayer. Yes, he is bowing to the ground. That always comes just before the end." The deacon took the 3-ruble note, discreetly slipped into his hand, under his rough, shaggy cuff, and promised to register Levin's name. Then quickly clacking in his new boots across the flagstones of the empty church, he went to the altar. In a moment he looked out and beckoned to Levin. The thought till that moment locked up in Levin's brain began to stir, but he made haste to bring it to order. "It will be arranged somehow," he said to himself, and went toward the ambo. He mounted several steps, turned to the right, and saw the priest, a little old man, whose thin beard was almost white, with kindly but rather weary eyes, standing near the reading desk, turning over the leaves of a missal. After a slight bow to Levin, he began to read the prayers. Having finished them, he kneeled and faced Levin. "Christ is here, invisible though, to hear your confession," he said, pointing to the crucifix. "Do you believe all that the Holy Apostolic Church teaches us?" he continued, turning his eyes from Levin's face and crossing his hand under his stole. "I have doubted. I still doubt everything," said Levin, in a voice which sounded disagreeable to his own ears, and he was silent. The priest waited a few moments to see if he would say anything more, then closed his eyes, and speaking rapidly, with a Vladimirsky accent, he said, "To doubt is characteristic of human weakness. We must pray the Lord Almighty to strengthen you. What are your principal sins?" The priest spoke without the least interruption, and as if he were afraid of losing time. "My principal sin is doubt. I doubt everything, and I am generally doubting." "To doubt is a characteristic of human weakness," said the priest, using the same words. "What do you doubt principally?" "Everything. I sometimes doubt even the existence of God," said Levin, in spite of himself, horrified at the impropriety of what he was saying, but his words seemed to make no impression on the priest. "How can you doubt the existence of God?" he asked, with an almost imperceptible smile. Levin was silent. "What doubts can you have about the Creator when you contemplate his works?" pursued the priest in his quick habitual utterance. "Who ornamented the celestial vault with its stars? Who decked the earth with all its beauty? How can these things exist without a Creator?" And he cast a questioning glance at Levin. Levin felt that it would be out of place to enter into a philosophical discussion with the priest, and, therefore, in his reply said only what referred directly to the question. "I do not know." "You do not know? Then how can you doubt that God has created everything?" asked the priest with a light-hearted perplexity. "I cannot understand it," replied Levin, blushing, and feeling that his words were stupid, and that in such a position they could not be other than stupid. "Pray to God, have recourse to him. The fathers of the church themselves doubted, and asked God to strengthen their faith. The devil has mighty power, and we should resist him. Pray to God, pray to God," repeated the priest rapidly. Then he kept silent for a moment, as if he were buried in thought. "They tell me that you intend to marry the daughter of my parishioner and spiritual son, the Prince Shtcherbatsky," he added with a smile. "She is a beautiful girl." "Yes," replied Levin, blushing for the priest. "Why does he need to ask such questions at confession?" he said to himself. And, as if replying to his thought, the priest continued, "You are preparing for marriage, and perhaps God may grant you offspring. Isn't that so? Now, what education will you give to your little children if you do not conquer the temptations of the devil who causes you to doubt?" he asked with a gentle reproach. "If you love your children as a good father, you will not only wish for them riches, luxury, and honor, but still more, their salvation and their spiritual enlightenment by the light of truth. Is this not so? How will you reply to the innocent child who asks you, 'Papasha, who made all that delights me on the earth, the water, the sunshine, the flower, the plants?' Will you answer, 'I know nothing about it'? Can you ignore what the Lord God in his infinite goodness has revealed to you? And if the child asks you, 'What awaits me beyond the tomb?' What will you say to him if you know nothing? How will you answer him? Will you give him up to the seductions of the world and the devil? That is not right," said he, stopping, and turning his head on one side, looked at Levin out of his kind, gentle eyes. Levin was silent, not because he was afraid this time to enter into a discussion with the priest, but because nobody had ever put such questions to him before, and because he thought there was plenty of time to consider them before his children should be in a state to question him. "You are about to enter upon a phase of life," continued the priest, "where one must choose his path and keep to it. Pray God in his mercy to keep and sustain you. And in conclusion, may our Lord God, Jesus Christ, pardon you, my son, in his goodness and loving kindness to all mankind." And the priest, ending the formulas of absolution, took leave of him, after giving him his blessing. Levin, returning home that day, felt happy enough at the thought of being free from a false situation without having been obliged to lie. Besides, there remained with him a vague idea that what that good and gentle little old man said to him was not altogether so stupid as he at first had thought it was going to be, and that he really had something worth clearing up some time. Not now, of course, he thought, but later on. Levin felt more than ever at this time that there were troubled and obscure places in his soul, and that, concerning his religion, he was in exactly the same position which he so clearly saw others occupying and disliked, and which he blamed his friend Sviazhsky for. Levin spent that evening with his betrothed at Dolly's, and in trying to explain to Stepan Arkadyevitch the excitable condition in which he found himself, was very gay. He said that he was like a dog being trained to jump through a hoop, which, delighted at having learned his lesson, wags his tail, and is eager to leap over the table and through the window. End of chapter 1. Part 5, Chapter 2 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. The princess and Darya Alexandrovna insisted on strictly observing the established customs, so Levin was not to see his bride on the day of the wedding, and he dined at his hotel with 3 bachelors, who met in his room by chance. They were Sergey Ivanovitch, Katavasov, an old university friend, now professor of natural sciences, whom Levin had met on the street and brought home to dinner, Chirikov, his chauffeur, or best man, justice of the peace at Moscow, Levin's companion in bear hunting. The dinner was very lively. Sergey Ivanovitch was in the best of spirits, and greatly enjoyed Katavasov's originality. Katavasov, feeling that his originality was appreciated and understood, made a great display of it, and Chirikov added his share of gaiety to the conversation. "So, here is our friend, Konstantin Dmitrievitch," said Katavasov, with the slow speech of a professor accustomed to talk ex cathedra. "What a talented fellow he was! I speak of him in the past, for he no longer exists. He loved science when he left the university. He took an interest in humanity. Now he employs half his faculties in deceiving himself, and the other half in apologizing for the deception." "I never met a more confirmed enemy of marriage than you," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "No, I am not his enemy. I am a friend of the distribution of labor. People who cannot do anything ought to be the ones to propagate the race. All the rest should devote themselves to their intellectual development and welfare. That is my opinion. I know a great many people are inclined to confound these two, but I am not of the number." "How delighted I should be to hear that you were in love!" exclaimed Levin. "Pray invite me to your wedding." "But I am already in love." "Yes, with some cuttlefish, you know," said Levin, turning to his brother. "Mikhail Semyonitch has written a work on the nutrition, and—" "Now I beg of you not to confuse matters. It is of no consequence what I have written, but it is a fact that I love a cuttlefish." "That need not prevent your loving a wife." "No, but my wife would object to my loving the cuttlefish." "Why so?" "You will see how it will be. Now you love your farming, hunting. Well, just wait a while." "I met Arkhip today," said Chirikov. "He says that there are quantities of elk at Prudnoye, and 2 bears." "Well, you must hunt them without me." "You see how it is," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "You may as well say good bye to bear hunting. Your wife won't allow it." Levin smiled. The idea that his wife would object to his hunting seemed so delightful that he was ready to renounce the pleasure of ever meeting a bear again. "However, I am sorry to hunt those 2 bears without you," said Chirikov. "Do you remember the last time at Kapolovo? The hunting was marvellous." Levin did not care to spoil his friend's illusion that life would be worth nothing without hunting, and so he made no reply. "The custom of saying good-bye to one's bachelor life is not without meaning," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "However happy one may be, a man regrets his liberty. Confess that, like Gogolevsky, when he was engaged, you feel like jumping out of the window." "Certainly, but he won't confess it," said Katavasov with a loud laugh. "The window is open. Come now, let us go to Tver. We might find one bear in her lair. Indeed, we still have time to catch the 5 o'clock train," said Chirikov, smiling. "Hear them laugh." "Well, upon my honor," replied Levin, smiling, too, "I cannot discover the least trace of regret in my soul for my lost liberty." "Yes, your soul is in such a chaos now that you cannot find anything in it," said Katavasov. "Wait till it becomes calmer, then you will see." "No, if I felt in the least degree that there was nothing beyond my feeling of—" he did not like to speak of love before Katavasov, "of happiness, I should regret my lost freedom. But it is not so at all. I am even delighted at my loss of freedom." "You are a hopeless case," exclaimed Katavasov. "However, let us drink to his recovery, or let us at least hope for him that 1% of his illusions may be accomplished. And even that would be such happiness as was never known on this earth." Shortly after dinner the guests separated, to dress for the wedding. When he was left alone, and had a chance to think over the conversation of these bachelors, Levin again asked himself whether he really regretted the liberty of which his friends had just been talking, and he smiled at the idea. Liberty? Why liberty? Happiness for me consists in loving, in thinking her thoughts, in wishing her wishes, without any liberty. That is happiness. "But can I know her thoughts, her wishes, her feelings?" whispered some voice. The smile disappeared from his face and he fell into a deep study. And suddenly a strange feeling came over him. Fear and doubt came over him. Doubt about everything. "Suppose she does not love me? What if she is marrying me merely for the sake of being married? What if she herself does not know what she is doing?" he asked himself. "Will she, perhaps, see her mistake and discover, after we are married, that she does not love me, and that she never can love me?" And strange, even painful thoughts about Kitty came to his mind. He began to be violently jealous of Vronsky, just as he had been the year before. There came up before him, like the memory of yesterday, that evening when he had seen them together, and he suspected her of not having confessed everything to him. He quickly sprang up. "No," he said in despair, "I cannot let this remain so. I will go and find her. I will talk with her, and say to her again for the last time, 'We are free. Is it not better to stop just where we are? Anything is better than lifelong unhappiness, shame, distrust.'" And with despair in his heart, full of hatred toward all mankind, toward himself and Kitty, he left the hotel and hastened to her house. He found her in one of the rear rooms sitting on a large chest, busy with her maid, looking over dresses of all colors, spread out over the backs of the chairs and on the floor. "Ah!" she exclaimed, beaming with joy at seeing him. "What brings thee? What brings you?" Even up to this last day she sometimes said "tui," sometimes "vous." "I was not expecting you. I'm just disposing of my maiden wardrobe." "Ah, that is good," he replied, frowning at the maid. "Run away, Dunyasha. I will call you," said Kitty. And as soon as she had gone, she asked, using the second person of the pronoun, "What is the matter with thee?" this time resolutely. She remarked her lover's strange, excited, and gloomy face, and was seized with fear. "Kitty, I am in torture, and I cannot suffer alone," he said to her with despair in his voice, stopping in front of her and looking into her eyes in a beseeching way. He saw at once by her face, so sincere and loving, that nothing whatever would result from his determination. Yet he felt an urgent need of being reassured from her own lips. "I came to tell you that it is not yet too late, that everything can even now be taken back." "What? I do not understand. What is the matter with thee?" "I am, as I have said and thought 1,000 times before, I am not worthy of you. You once could not consent to marry me. Think of it. Perhaps you are mistaken now. Think of it well. You cannot love me, if... It is better to acknowledge it," he continued without looking at her. "I shall be miserable, but no matter. Let people say what they please. Anything is better than unhappiness. But anything is better now, while there is yet time." "I do not understand you," she replied, frightened. "You mean you want to take back your word? Break off our—" "Yes, if you do not love me." "You must be insane!" she exclaimed, red with vexation. But the sight of Levin's piteous face arrested her anger, and pushing the frocks from one of the chairs, she sat down near him. "What are you thinking of? Tell me all." "I think that you cannot love me. Why should you love me?" "Bozhe moi, what can I do?" said she, and she burst into tears. "Oh, what have I done?" he cried instantly, and throwing himself on his knees, he covered her hands with kisses. When the princess came into the room 5 minutes later, she found them completely reconciled. Kitty had not only convinced him of her love, but in answer to his question, she had explained to him why she loved him. She said that she loved him because she understood him perfectly, because she knew that he could love, and that all he loved was good and beautiful. Levin found the explanation perfectly satisfactory. When the princes came in, they were sitting side by side on the big chest, looking over the frocks and discussing their fate. Kitty wanted to give Dunyasha the brown frock that she wore the day Levin proposed to her, and he insisted that it should not be given to anyone, and that Dunyasha should have the blue frock. "But don't you see that she is a brunette, and the blue frock will not be becoming to her? I have thought it all over." When she learned why Levin was there, the princess was half vexed at him, and sent him home to make his own toilet, and leave Kitty in peace, as Charles was going to dress Kitty's hair. "She is quite excited enough," said she. "She has eaten nothing for days, and is losing all her beauty. And here you come to trouble her with your foolishness. Come, go away now, my dear." Levin went back to the hotel, guilty and ashamed, but reassured. His brother, Darya Alexandrovna, and Stepan Arkadyevitch, in full dress, were already waiting with holy images to bless him. There was no time to be lost. Darya Alexandrovna had to go home again to get her son perfumed and curled for the occasion. The child was to carry the sacred image before the bride. The one carriage must be sent for the Schäfer, or best man, while another was to come to the hotel for Sergey Ivanovitch. This day was full of complications. One thing was certain, that no delay was possible, for it was already 6:30. The ceremony of the benediction was anything but solemn. Stepan Arkadyevitch assumed a comically grave attitude beside his wife, raised the sacred image, and obliged Levin to kneel before it, while he blessed him with an affectionate and wicked smile. At last he kissed him 3 times, and Darya Alexandrovna did the same very hastily, for she was in a great hurry to get away, and in great perplexity about the carriage arrangements. "Well, this is what we will do. You go for him in our carriage, and perhaps Sergey Ivanovitch will be so good as to come immediately, and to send back his." "Certainly, with pleasure." "We will come back together. Has the luggage been sent?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Yes," replied Levin, and he called Kuzma to help him dress. Chapter 3 Part 5, Chapter 3 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. A throng of people, principally women, surrounded the church, brilliantly lighted for the wedding. Those who could not get inside were pushing up around the windows and elbowing one another as they strove to look through the gratings. Already more than 20 carriages stood in a line in the street, under the supervision of policemen. A police officer stood at the entrance in brilliant uniform, unmindful of the cold. Carriages kept driving up and departing, now ladies in full dress, holding up their trains, now men taking off their hats or kepis. In the church itself both chandeliers and all the candles before the images were already burning. The golden gleam on the red background of the iconostas, and the gilded chasings of the icons, and the silver of the candelabra and of the censers, and the flaggings of the floor, and the tapestries and the banners suspended in the choir and the steps of the pulpit, and the old dingy missals, and the priestly robes, were all flooded with lights. On the right-hand side of the warm church, amid the brave array of dress coats, uniforms, and white neckties, and satin, silk, and velvet robes, of coiffures, flowers, and bare necks and arms, and long gloves, there was a constant flow of restrained but lively conversation, which echoed strangely beneath the high, vaulted roof. Whenever the door opened with a plaintive creak, the murmur ceased, and everyone turned around, hoping at last to see the bridal pair. But the door had already opened more than 10 times, and each time it proved to be some belated guest, or guests, admitted among the number of the friends on the right, or some spectator who had been clever enough to deceive or elude the police officer, and sat down among the strangers on the left. The friends and strangers had passed through every phase of waiting. At first they supposed that the bride and bridegroom would be there any minute, and did not attach any importance to the delay. Then they began to look around at the door more and more frequently, wondering what could have happened. At last the delay began to be awkward, and the relatives and invited guests tried to assume an air of indifference, as if they were absorbed in their conversation. The archdeacon, as if to let people know that his time was precious, every now and then gave an impatient cough, which made the windows rattle. In the choir the singers, tired of waiting, could be heard, now trying their voices, and now blowing their noses. The priest kept sending, now a sacristan, now a deacon, to find out if the bridegroom was coming, and appeared himself more and more frequently at the side doors in his lilac cassock with its embroidered sash. Finally a lady looked at her watch, and said to the one sitting next to her, "This is very strange," and immediately all the invited guests began to express their surprise and discontent aloud. One of the Schäfers, or best men, went to see what had happened. During all this time Kitty, in her white dress, long veil, and wreath of orange blossoms, was standing in the hall of the Shtcherbatsky mansion with her sister, Madame Lvova, and her nuptial godmother, looking out of the window, and had been waiting for half an hour for the Schäfer to announce the bridegroom's arrival at the church. Levin, meanwhile, in black trousers, but without either coat or waistcoat, was walking up and down his room at the hotel, opening the door every minute to look out into the corridor. But in the corridor nothing like what he wanted was to be seen, and, wringing his hands in despair, he would pour forth his complaints to Stepan Arkadyevitch, who was calmly smoking. "Did you ever see a man in such a horribly absurd situation?" "Yes, abominable," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, with his tranquil smile. "But be calm, they will have it here very soon." "No, hang it," said Levin, with restrained fury. "All these idiotic open waistcoats! Absolutely useless," he added, looking at his tumbled shirt bosom. "And what if my trunks have already gone to the railway station?" he exclaimed in despair. "Then you can wear mine." "I might have done that in the first place." "Don't be ridiculous. Wait, it is sure to come all right." The fact was that when Levin began to dress, Kuzma, his old servant, was supposed to have taken out his dress coat, his waistcoat, and all that was necessary. "But the shirt!" cried Levin. "You have your shirt on," replied Kuzma, with an innocent smile. Kuzma had not thought to provide a clean shirt, and having received his orders to pack everything up and take them to the Shtcherbatskys' house, from which the young couple was to start away that same evening, he had done so, leaving out only his dress suit. The one that Levin had worn all day was tumbled and unfit to wear with his open waistcoat. It would take too long to send to the Shtcherbatskys. They sent out to buy one. The lackey returned empty-handed. Everything was shut up. It was Sunday. A shirt was brought from Stepan Arkadyevitch's house. It was ridiculously broad and short. At last, in despair, he had to send to the Shtcherbatskys to have his trunks opened. So, while the people were waiting in the church, the unfortunate groom, like a wild beast in a cage, was ramping with despair up and down his room, looking out into the corridor, and in his horror and despair imagining what Kitty might be thinking all this time. Finally the guilty Kuzma rushed into the room, all out of breath, with the shirt in his hand. "I got there just in time, as they were carrying off the trunks," he exclaimed. In 3 minutes Levin rushed through the corridor, without daring to look at his watch, for fear of increasing his agony of mind. "You can't change anything," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, with a smile, following leisurely. "I told you it would come out all right." Chapter 4 Part 5, Chapter 4 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. "Here they come. There he is. Which one? Is it the youngest? Just look at her. Poor little Matushka, more dead than alive," was murmured through the crowd, as Levin, having met the bride at the entrance, came into the church with her. Stepan Arkadyevitch told his wife the reason of the delay, and a smile passed over the congregation as it was whispered about. Levin neither saw any one nor anything, but kept his eyes fixed on his bride. Everyone said that she had grown very homely during these last days, and certainly she did not look so pretty under her bridal wreath as usual, but such was not Levin's opinion. He looked at her high coiffure, with the long white veil attached, and white flowers, at her high plaited collar encircling her slender neck in a peculiarly maidenly fashion, and just showing it a little in front, her remarkably graceful figure, and she seemed more beautiful to him than ever. But it was not because the flowers, or the veil, or her Paris gown added anything to her beauty, but because of the expression of her lovely face, her eyes, her lips, with their innocent sincerity, preserved in spite of all this adornment. "I was beginning to think you had made up your mind to run away," she said to him with a smile. "What happened to me was so absurd that I am ashamed to tell you about it," he replied, reddening, and he was compelled to turn to Sergey Ivanovitch, who came up at that moment. "The tail of the shirt is a good one," said Sergey Ivanovitch, throwing back his head with a laugh. "Yes, yes," replied Levin, without understanding a word which had been said. "Well, Kostya, now is the time to make a serious decision," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, pretending to look greatly scared. "The question is a grave one, and you must appreciate its full importance. I have been asked whether the candles shall be new ones, or those that have been partially burned. The difference is 10 rubles," he added, pursing his lips in a smile. "I have decided about it, but I am afraid that you will not approve of it." Levin knew that there was some joke about it, but he could not smile. "What will you decide on? New ones or old ones? That is the question." "Yes, yes, new ones." "Well, I am very glad. The question is settled," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Oh, how little importance a man is at such a time as this," he murmured to Chirikov, while Levin drew near to his bride, after looking at her in a bewildered way. "Notice, Kitty, who first sets foot on the carpet," said the Countess Nordstone, stepping up to her. "You look your best," she said, addressing Levin. "Are you frightened?" asked Marya Dmitrievna, an old aunt. "You aren't cold, are you? You look pale. Bend forward a moment," said Madame Lvova, raising her beautiful round arms to repair some disarrangement of her sister's flowers. Dolly came up and tried to say something, but she could not speak, and burst into tears and laughed unnaturally. Kitty looked at those around her as absent-mindedly as Levin. During this time the officiating clergymen had put on their sacerdotal robes, and the priest, accompanied by the deacon, came to the lectern placed at the entrance of the sacred doors. The priest addressed a few words to Levin, but Levin failed to understand what he said. "Take the bride's hand and go forward," whispered his best man to him. For a long time he was unable to make out what was expected of him. For a long time they tried to coach him, and were ready to give it up, because he did the opposite of what he was told. Finally he comprehended that he was to take Kitty's right hand with his right hand, without changing his position. When at last he took the bride by her hand in the proper way, the priest advanced a few steps and stopped in front of the lectern. The relatives and invited guests followed the young couple with a murmur of voices and a rustling of trains. Someone stooped down to arrange the bride's train. In the church, A silence so profound reigned that the drops of wax could be heard falling from the candles. The old priest in a calotte, his white hair shining like silver, drawn back behind his ears, drew forth his wrinkled hands from beneath his heavy silver chasuble, ornamented with a cross of gold, approached the lectern, and turned over the leaves of the missal. Stepan Arkadyevitch came softly and spoke in his ear, and made a sign to Levin, and then stepped back. The priest lighted 2 candles decorated with flowers, and, holding them slanting in his left hand, so that the wax slowly fell from them, turned toward the young couple. It was the same old man who had heard Levin's confession. He looked at the bride and bridegroom, out of his sad, weary eyes, and then, with a sigh, blessed Levin with his right hand, then, with especial tenderness, placed his fingers on Kitty's bended head, gave them the candles, and taking the censer, moved quietly away. "Is this all real?" thought Levin, and he glanced at his bride. He looked down somewhat from above on her profile, and by the motion of her lips and her eyebrows he knew that she felt his look. She did not raise her head, but the high plaited collar which reached to her little pink ear trembled a little. He saw that she was stifling a sigh, and her hand imprisoned in its long glove trembled as it held the candle. The whole affair of the shirt, his late arrival, his conversation with his relatives and friends, their displeasure, his ridiculous position, everything at once vanished from his memory, and he was conscious of a mixed feeling of terror and joy. The archdeacon, a tall, handsome man, his hair curling all around his head and wearing a stikar, or surplice, of silver cloth, came briskly forward, and with the customary gesture raised his stole with 2 fingers and stopped before the priest. "Bless us, O Lord!" Slowly, one after the other, rocking the atmosphere into billows of sound, echoed the solemn syllables. "May the Lord bless you now and through all ages," replied the old priest, in a sweet and musical voice, still turning over the leaves. And the response, chanted by the invisible choir, filled the church to the very roof of the vault with a deep, full sound, which increased, then ceased for a moment, and softly died away. They prayed as usual for the eternal repose and welfare of their souls, for the synod and the emperor, and then for the servants of God, Konstantin and Yekaterina, that day about to be wed. "Let us pray the Lord to send them his love, his peace, and his aid," the whole church seemed to say in the voice of the archdeacon. Levin listened to these words and was impressed by them. How did they know that aid was exactly what I need? Yes, aid. What can I know? What can I do without aid? He thought, recalling his recent doubts and fears. When the deacon had ended the liturgy, the priest, with a book in his hand, turned toward the bridal couple. "O eternal God, who unitest by an indissoluble bond those who are separate," he read, in a strong melodious voice. "Thou who didst bless Isaac and Rebekah, and showest thy mercy to their descendants, bless also these thy servants, Konstantin and Yekaterina, and pour forth thy benefits upon them. Because thou art a merciful and beneficent God, we offer thee the glory, to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be." "Amen," again chanted the invisible choir. "Who unitest by an indissoluble bond those who are separate." How those profound words respond to what one feels at such a time. Does she understand it as I do? Thought Levin. And looking down, he gazed into her eyes. From the expression of Kitty's face he concluded that she did feel it as he did, but he was mistaken. She scarcely comprehended the words of the service, and during the time of the espousal did not even hear them. She could not hear them or comprehend them, so powerful was the single feeling which filled her heart and kept increasing all the time. This feeling was one of delight at the perfect fulfillment of what had been taking place in her heart during the past month and a half, and during those 6 weeks had made her happy and restless by turns. From that day when, in her cinnamon-colored gown, in the hall of their house on the Arbatsky, she had silently approached Levin to give herself wholly to him. From that day, from that moment, she felt a complete rupture had been made with all her past life, and another existence, new and unknown, without, however, changing her outward life, had begun. These 6 weeks had been at once a very happy and a very trying time. Her whole life, her hopes and desires, were all concentrated on this man, whom she did not even yet fully understand, to whom she was united by a sentiment which she understood still less, and which attracted her and repelled her by turns, and at the same time she had gone on living in the conditions of her former life. Living in this old life, she was horrified at herself, at her complete and invincible indifference toward her whole past, to things, to habits, even to her relatives, whom she loved, and who loved her, her mother, who was pained by her indifference, and her gentle father, whom she had loved more than any one else in the world. At one moment she was horrified at this indifference, at the next she was filled with joy at that which had brought her to such a feeling. She could not imagine or desire anything except life with this man. But this new life had not yet begun, and she could form no definite idea of it. It was only an expectation, a fear and joy of something new and unknown. And now this expectation, as well as her remorse for not regretting the past, were at an end, and the new life was beginning. This new and unknown future could not fail to be alarming. But whether it was alarming or not, it was only the fulfillment of what had taken place in her soul 6 weeks before, only the sanctification of what had been taking place in her soul for a long time. The priest, turning to the lectern again, with difficulty took off Kitty's little ring and passed it as far as the first joint of Levin's finger. "I unite thee, Constantine, servant of God, to Karenina, servant of God." And he repeated the same formula in placing a large ring on Kitty's delicate little rosy finger, pathetic in its weakness. The bridal pair tried to understand what was expected of them, but each time made a mistake, and the priest corrected them in a low voice. At last the priest, blessing them with his fingers, again gave Kitty the large ring and Levin the small one, and again they got confused, and twice passed the rings from hand to hand, failing to interchange them as they should have done. Dolly Chirikov and Stepan Arkadyevitch stepped out to assist them in their difficulty. The people around them smiled and whispered, but the tenderly solemn expression on the faces of the young couple did not change. On the contrary, even when they were blundering with the rings, they looked more serious and solemn than before, and the smile on Stepan Arkadyevitch's face died away, as he whispered to them that they were to put on their own rings. It seemed to him that a smile might be offensive to them. "O thou who, from the beginning of the world, hast created man, male and female," continued the priest, after the ceremony of the rings, "and hast given to man the woman to be his aid and delight. Therefore, O thou, our Lord God, who hast given thy blessing to thy chosen, to thy servants, our fathers, to thine inheritance, do thou bless thy servants Constantine and Ekaterina, and confirm their nuptials in faith and concord and truth and love." Levin's breast heaved. Disobedient tears filled his eyes. He kept feeling more and more that all his thoughts on marriage, his visions of how he should dispose his life, had hitherto been infantile, and that there was something that had never been comprehensible to him. And now he understood its meaning less than ever, although he was now wholly in its power. End of chapter 4. Part 5, Chapter 5 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A recording by Marianne Spiegel. All Moscow, all the relatives and acquaintances, were at the church, and during the time of the marriage service, in the brilliant light that flooded the church, in that throng of handsomely dressed women and girls, and of men in white neckties, in swallow-tails, or in uniform, there was a decorously subdued conversation, especially among the men, for the women were absorbed in observing all the details of a ceremony which is always so full of interest for them. A little group of friends surrounded the bride, and among them were her 2 sisters, Dolly and the beautiful Madame Lvova, just returned from abroad. "Why is Mary in lilac at a wedding? It is almost mourning," said Madame Kerensky. "With her complexion it is her only salvation," replied Madame de Betsky. "But But I wonder why they had the ceremony in the evening. That savours of the merchant." "It is pleasanter. I too was married in the evening," said Madame Korsunsky, sighing and recalling how beautiful she had been on that day, and how ridiculously in love with her husband had been, and how it was all so different now. "They say that those who have been best men more than 10 times never marry. I tried to make myself proof against marriage in this way, but the place was taken," said Count Zineavin to the handsome young Princess Tcharskaya, who had designs on him. A smile was her only reply. She was looking at Kitty, and thinking how and when she would stand with Count Zineavin in Kitty's place, and how she would then remind him of the joke that he had made. Shtcherbatsky confided to the old Frilina Nikolaevna his intention to place the crown on Kitty's headdress to bring her good luck. "There's no need of wearing a headdress," replied Frilina Nikolaevna, who had long ago decided that if the old widower, whom she was setting her cap for, should offer himself, she would be married very simply. "I don't like this display." Sergey Ivanovitch, who was talking with Darya Dmitrievna, jestingly declared that the fashion of wedding tours was becoming widespread because young couples were always rather bashful. "Your brother must be very proud of his choice. She is charming. You must envy him." "The time is gone by for that, Darya Dmitrievna," he replied, and an unexpected expression of sadness overspread his face. Stepan Arkadyevitch was telling his sister-in-law his pun on divorce. "Somebody ought to arrange her wreath," replied the latter, without listening. "What a pity that she has grown so ugly," said the Countess Nordstone to Madame Lvova. "After all, he isn't worth her little finger, is he?" "I don't agree with you. I am very much pleased with him, and not only because he is going to be my beau-frère," replied Madame Lvova. "How well he appears! It is so difficult to appear well at such a time, and not to be absurd. He is neither ridiculous nor stiff. One feels that he is touched." "Did you expect this marriage?" "Almost. He has always been in love with her." "Well, we shall see which will be the first to step on the carpet. I have advised Kitty to look out for that." "That makes no difference," replied Madame Lvova. "In our family we are all submissive wives. But I have taken pains to keep mine under the thumb. How is it with you, Dolly?" Dolly was standing near them and heard them, but she did not reply. She was affected. Tears filled her eyes, and she could not have uttered a word without crying. She was glad for Kitty and Levin. She was thinking of her own wedding, and as she glanced at the brilliant Stepan Arkadyevitch, she forgot the real state of things, and only remembered his first innocent love. She was thinking, too, of other women, her relatives and acquaintances, whom she remembered at this important and solemn hour of their lives, how they, like Kitty, stood under the crown, how they renounced the past with joy, and began a mysterious future, with hope and fear in their hearts. Among the number she recalled her dear Anna, the details of whose approaching divorce she had just heard. She had seen her enveloped in a white veil, as pure as Kitty, with her wreath of orange blossoms. And now? "It is terribly strange," she whispered. The sisters and friends were not the only ones to follow with interest the minutest details of the ceremony. There were women among the strangers looking on who held their breath, for fear of losing a single movement of the bride or bridegroom, and who replied absent-mindedly to the jokes or idle remarks of the men, often not even hearing them. "Why is she so troubled? Are they marrying her against her will?" "Against her will? To such a handsome man? Is he a prince?" "Is that her sister in white satin? There, just hear the deacon howl. Let her fear her husband." "Are the singers from Chudov?" "No, from the synod. I've asked the servant about it. He says that her husband is going to take her away to his estate. Awfully rich, they say. That is why she is marrying him." "They make a handsome pair." "And you pretend to say, Marya Vasilievna, that they don't wear crinolines any longer. Just look at that one in the puce-colored dress. You would say she was an ambassador's wife by the way she is dressed. Do you see now?" "What a sweet little creature the bride is, like a lamb for the slaughter. You may say what you please. I can't help pitying her." Such were the remarks of the spectators who had succeeded in getting past the door of the church. End of chapter 5.